Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Tyrion 5. The acting hand of the king sat in his room, his desk littered with complaints, favors, and other stupid reports that fell to him because his nephew refused to do any actual work in ruling his kingdom, or what was left of it. There were reports from castles in the southern Westerlands that small armies of northerners had once again re-entered the region and were heading right for them. It seems the Blackfish was intent on claiming the rest of the West, while his great-nephew secured the aid of the Reach, and went after the brother-killer Stannis Baratheon. Soon, all that would be left in the West would be the crown jewels, Casterly Rock, and Lannisport. Tyrion was looking over an interesting dispute between two knights in the Crownlands when Pod, his squire, entered the room. A scroll in his hand, he bowed to Tyrion. "My lord, Lord Varys asked me to give this to you." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And where is the spider? Why is he not here to give me this information?" he asked, joking with the boy. Unfortunately, Pod didn't take it that way. "I'm afraid Lord Varys is currently occupied. He said he was meeting with one of his little birds when he gave me the scroll." Pod explained awkwardly, afraid that Tyrion was displeased with him. Tyrion shrugged. "Fair enough," he sighed, and held out his hand, knowing that the sarcasm had gone over the boy's head. Pod quickly handed over the scroll before resuming his awkward stance in front of Tyrion. The imp glanced at him. Podrick Payne, or Pod as Tyrion called him, had come into Tyrion's service when he had met with his father in the Riverlands towards the beginning of the war. The boy's last master had stolen a ham from Tyrion's father, and was hanged for it, while Pod was let off with a warning because of who his family was. He was a skinny, shy boy who seemed to be scared of his own shadow. He was naive, almost pitifully so, but Tyrion had grown to care for the lad. He worked hard to do his best, and as someone who's worked hard to be acknowledged for his achievements, Tyrion could relate to the boy. Tyrion gestured towards the balcony, where Bran was relaxing and drinking wine. "Why don't you have some wine?" he offered. "Have you been busy much?" Pod shook his head. "No, my lord. I took care of Bronn's horse and sharpened his sword, but that was all." Tyrion looked at the sellsword, who was casually popping grapes into his mouth. "You know I can get you a squire, right?" It wouldn't be hard for Tyrion to find a boy who could serve the dark-humored sellsword. It would be rather odd, because Bronn isn't an actual knight, but there was no shortage of noble families who would be willing to hand over their second or third son to the personal guard of the acting hand. People were truly desperate to get power any way they could. Bronn shrugged. "Why? You hardly use yours," he pointed out, throwing the empty grapevine out over the balcony. "I was just putting the boy to use other than running messages." Tyrion shook his head, looking back at Pod. "Nevertheless, you've earned a rest. Have some fruit and wine." Pod bowed and made his way over to Bronn, taking a seat right across from him. The sellsword poured the boy some wine while Tyrion went back to his reports. The imp unrolled the scroll, briefly looking over the contents. The first few words caught his attention, forcing him to read the entire message through. When he finished reading, he laid down the message, tapping his desk thoughtfully. "Fuck me," he muttered. "Is everything all right, my lord?" Pod asked worriedly. "It seems our enemies are making friends with one another," Tyrion replied tiredly. "Stannis Baratheon was found dead in his war camp, and the Stormlords have decided to return to their good friends in the Reach, who are currently sworn to Robb Stark." "What's that? 4 kingdoms currently set against us?" Bronn asked, using his knife to carve apple slices. Tyrion gave the sellsword a dirty look, who just looked unimpressed. "It seems your arithmetic is nearly as good as your knife work, my friend," Tyrion said. "There are 5 kingdoms set against us." Bronn stopped cutting into the apple to make a vague gesture with his knife. "Right, those iron cunts have a king, also, don't they?" He shook his head. "They never learn." Pod nodded. "Balon Greyjoy," he added quietly. The one thing Tyrion did appreciate about the boy was that he did seem to know his history, or at least names of the noble houses. "Well, this all sounds horrible," Bronn said casually, before going back to eating his apple. "So what do you plan to do about it?" he asked, munching on the fruit. Tyrion rolled his eyes at the sellsword's casualness. Tyrion knew that he had Bronn's allegiance for as long as it was beneficial to the sellsword. After all, They can't get paid by the dead. We need allies, but my nephew has made that rather hard, he grumbled. Joffrey acted like a spoiled prat at the best of times. At the worst, well, he resembled the characteristics of the Mad King more than Tyrion wanted to admit. After beheading Ned Stark on the steps of the Sept of Baelor and the rumor of the boy's parentage, there weren't many who were willing to tie their wagon to the Lannisters, which seemed a lost cause at this point. What about the Lords of the Blackwater? Pod suggested shyly. Lord Varys never mentioned that they went to Robb Stark. Tyrion stared at his squire before glancing back at the letter, rereading it once more just to make sure. He slammed his hand on the desk. Pod, you're fucking brilliant, he said, looking at the boy, who had gone red with embarrassment. Bronn raised an eyebrow. I'm not questioning the lad's brains, but why? The Lords of the Blackwater were the first lords to declare for Stannis Baratheon, but since he's dead, we can bring them to our side. Tyrion explained, I almost overlooked the fact that Varys said Stormlords and not Stannis' entire fucking army. Tyrion stacked the other reports to the side of his desk, placing a blank piece of parchment right in front of him. He quickly wrote out a message that he knew would translate well to a raven message. When he was done, he left it to dry, sprinkling sand on the blotches. When the message was ready, he rolled it up and got out of his seat, handing it to Pod. Take this to the Grand Maester, he ordered. Tell him to send this to all Lords of the Blackwater. Pod set down his cup and took the scroll, quickly leaving. Before he got to the door, he stumbled a bit but managed to regain his balance and composure by the time he was out the door. Tyrion chuckled as he watched Pod leave, taking his leftover wine and draining the rest of it himself. It was good, a Dornish vintage, if he was any judge. He had finally figured out where his sister got her wine and had Bronn make sure that wine was brought to his room as well. Apparently the man had refused Tyrion's offer at first, not wanting to upset the queen. Thankfully, Bronn had fixed the man's attitude with a knife and some careful words. Now Tyrion received great wine every other day. How many men do you think you'll get out of this? Bronn asked curiously. Tyrion shrugged, turning to look at the sellsword. A few thousand, I would hope, as well as a strong navy. What's the point of a navy if all the actual navies are on the other side of the bloody continent? Bronn scoffed, throwing his apple core over the balcony. A few seconds later came the surprised shout of the person who was hit by the core. Tyrion wagged his finger. For now they are on the other side, but when the Stark boy comes, he'll have the Red Wine fleet at his back. We'll need every damn ship we can get. Bronn grunted. So you get what? A few thousand men and some ships. The northern boy just got the reach. Where are our 100,000 men? Tyrion frowned. I am well aware of the predicament, he grumbled. What else do you want me to do? Magically produce whole armies out of my ass? Bronn shrugged. Only if you want. Tyrion glared at the sellsword. Bronn held up a hand. What about hiring a company of sellswords? He offered. The Golden Company damn good at what they do. I had Varys look into that already. They're on contract somewhere in the Free Cities. Tyrion said, as are most of the other companies. That's why Pod's comment had been so brilliant. Tyrion had been looking for allies everywhere, but to no avail. Now he would have a few thousand more men and some ships. It wasn't battle-hardened sellswords, but it was men who knew how to swing swords and shove spears into other men. Also, they wouldn't be as expensive. What about the Company of the Rose? Bronn suggested. Ha, Tyrion laughed mockingly. You want me to fight Northerners with ex-Northerners? Bronn frowned. The Company of the Rose is the second biggest mercenary company in all of Essos. They get the job done, and they're probably cheaper than the Golden Company. Tyrion glanced at his paid protection. The Company of the Rose hadn't been on the list of companies currently under contract in Essos. If he could hire them, then it might be the boost needed to shift the tides of war. I'll ask Varys to look into it, he said, waddling back towards his desk. Speaking of which, I have a job for you. Brune raised an eyebrow. What is it now?
The boy Pod.
I want you to train him, Tyrion said, hopping back up onto his seat. The Blood Master-at-Arms died in the riots, and my sister hasn't gotten around to getting a new one. Why don't you get some knight to train him? One of the fancy Kingsguard, Bronn said, crossing his arms. I'm paid to make sure no one stabs you, not to train a boy too scared of his own fucking shadow. Tyrion looked at him. I pay you, remember, he said. Besides, my lovely sister won't let me borrow any of the Kingsguard. Anyways, I highly doubt any of them have any real skill. Bronn frowned. The King's Guard answer to the king? Tyrion chuckled, shaking his head. They are sworn to the king, he explained, but they answer to his mother.
But Tyrion wasn't stupid.
He had found out rather quickly where allegiances were in the court. Cersei controlled most of the King's Guard, along with several courtiers and nobles who would do anything to gain her favor. Littlefinger had multiple merchants and business owners in his pockets, as well as numerous gold cloaks, although Jocelyn Bywater was slowly working on weeding them out. The only person Tyrion couldn't get a read on was Varys and his little birds. Oh, and Pyxell would wipe Tyrion's father's ass if asked. That's how loyal the old man was to the great Tyrion Lannister. Bronn sighed. Fine, I'll fucking train the boy. Tyrion nodded. Good. You'll start tomorrow, he said. Besides, he'll need to know how to fight when the might of 4 kingdoms come crashing down on us, he muttered quietly, so that Bronn didn't hear him. Line break.
Bronn.
Clatter. Come on, Bronn said, pacing in front of the boy, a blunted steel sword held loosely in his hand. The two had been sparring for over an hour, and the sellsword had beaten the squire so many times that he had lost count. Pod bent down to grab the sword, keeping his eyes on Bronn as his hand scrambled to find the sword. Finally, he got the sword and was forced to immediately bring it up in defense as Bronn attacked. The sellsword continued forward, putting the boy on the back foot till Pod was able to parry and slip out of the corner he had nearly been put in. You're learning, Bronn said. Both fighters were breathing heavily. Bronn was dressed in dark leathers, while Pod wore his usually studded jerkin. Pod was red-faced and his eyes were wide open as he fought, while Bronn paced almost casually. The only sign that he was taking the fight seriously was his eyes, which were narrowed and focused. React, Bronn barked, striking at the squire, who quickly parried and attacked himself. Bronn blocked the boy's blade as he grabbed Pod by the collar of her jerkin and threw him to the ground. In war, no one fights fair. Get that in your head now. While they fought, Bronn continued to call out what he called helpful advice. I've eaten squirrels with more fight than you. I say you last a minute, maybe 2 against an angry rabbit. If I put down my sword, will you pick yours up? Finally, after another half hour of Bronn beating the boy back and forth across the sparring yard, the sellsword gave the squire a reprieve. Pod sunk gratefully into a bench that sat in the shadow of the armory, his chest heaving with his head between his legs. Bronn tossed his sword back into the barrel of practice weapons before he poured 2 glasses of water. He flicked the squire in the head, pulling his head from his legs. Drink, he ordered, shoving one of the cups of water into Pod's hands. The boy nodded and took the glass, draining the water in a single gulp. You're bad at fighting, Bronn grunted, pouring the boy more water. Haven't your other masters taught you how to fight? Pod shook his head. Not really, the boy answered. The first knight I squired for treated me like a servant. The second was hung for stealing. I never learned to fight. Bronn nodded. That's real sad, he drawled, not sounding all that sad. I'll give you this. Stop being so damn timid. Pod stammered, about to defend himself before Bronn held up a hand. Don't speak, lad. Not till your face is a normal color. The sellsword ordered. Listen, I told Lord Tyrion that I would teach ya, but I can't do that if you keep dropping your sword whenever I look at you.
I'm sorry.
Pod apologized quietly. Bronn shook his head, looking up at the sky in annoyance. He was going to make the imp pay him a lot more money than he was getting now. He was being paid to kill the cunts who wanted the blonde smartmouth, not train his frightened squire who would lose a fight to his own shadow. I'll give you 5 minutes before we'll go at this again. Bronn said finally. This time don't drop your fucking sword. Trust your instincts and fight back. Trust my instincts? Pod asked.
Bronn cuffed the boy.
Believe it or not, your body wants to stay alive. Just let it do its job and kill the other fucker before he kills you. Robb 14. The march from Storm's End to Tumbleton had only taken a little less than a week. The army of 100,000 marched north on the King's Road before turning west on the Rose Road. Being so close to King's Landing, it had been more than tempting for Robb to take the capital, but he had other plans in mind for Joffrey. Robb was a good man who didn't hate many people, but Joffrey, the whiny, cowardly prick who sat on a chair of swords, was someone he truly hated with his heart and soul. Robb wanted Joffrey to truly fear him before he took the royal prick's head. He wanted to make him watch, powerless, as Robb defeated his grandfather, conquered the Westerlands, and then marched on King's Landing with a mighty army at his back. He wanted to make Joffrey watch as Robb tore every defense from around him and exposed the boy for what he was, a spoiled brat who never had the spine to face Robb on the battlefield. Tumbleton was an ideal stop for Robb and his army. The town was primarily used for trade, and being so close to the Mander River and King's Landing, it saw its fair share of goods run through the town. It had more than enough food to resupply the army, and the area around the city was large enough for Robb's men to camp, so long as they stayed off roads. Robb currently sat in the solar of Lord Footley, protector of Tumbleton, who had been gracious enough to lend the room to the Northern King and his commanders. Many messages had been sent to Bitterbridge and Highgarden from the North and Riverlands, and now Robb had to play catch-up. The last news he received was that Ser Brynden had conquered the Northern Westerlands. The Blackfish has done great work in the Riverlands, Lord Randall said, looking over a message from the Tawny Knight. Almost the entire Westerlands have fallen to him, leaving on Case Lannisport and Casterly Rock to be taken. Not to mention that he's pushed back Tywin's raiders quite a bit, Lord Rowan added. He sent nearly 1,000 riders south towards Pink Maiden to cut off the bastards. Will he march on Casterly Rock? Serra Baelor Hightower asked curiously. Lord Tarley shook his head. The Rock is one of the most defensible castles I've seen, he answered. It would take quite a host to siege the castle, let alone take it. Which he can't do anyways, because of how close Tywin is. Robb commented. Ser Brynden can only send in small armies to take castles. From the reports, Stafford Lannister stripped a lot of garrisons to put his host at Oxcross together. Lord Tarley is right. Ser Brynden would need nearly the entire host to take the Rock. Why not march north and take the bastard from behind while Ser Brynden leads a force south? Pinch him right between us? Ser Donal Swan asked. The heir to Stonehelm, along with his brother Balon, were welcome additions to Robb's retinue. Lord Golion Swan, the Lord of Stonehelm, had decided to remain home, his sword sheathed for good. Now the men of Stonehelm were commanded by the man's two sons, Donal and Balon. Both knights were chivalrous, loyal and honest. All traits that Robb valued. Donal was a solid man, dependable with average intelligence. If told what to do, he could be relied upon to see it done completely. But he was not a true strategist like Tarly or Caron. If there was ever a word to describe the man, it was ordinary. His brother, on the other hand, was a true asset to Robb as the newest member of his guard. Ser Balon was an excellent warrior, skilled with the lance, morning star and bow. Even Loras Tyrell, who had faced the man many times in tournaments, could not deny his martial abilities. We leave the Crownlanders at our back. Lord Caron explained. They may not be a lot of them, but even 10,000 men smashing into our rear could cost us double that number. That's all Tywin would need to slip from our grasp while we're reeling from an attack. Robb nodded. So we march north, he said. It's the only logical answer. Besides then, we simply sweep south towards King's Landing without having to worry about who's at our backs. I would agree with you, Your Grace, but I'm afraid that won't be as easy as you hope. Lord Randall grumbled angrily, handing Robb the message he had been reading. This came from Lady Olenna. Robb raised an eyebrow, but took the message. It read, Your Grace. My informants have told me that the Ironborn have invaded the north along the western coast. They are led by Victarion, Asha, and Theon Greyjoy. Blackfish has sent a raven from Riverrun. Lord Bolton has been sent north with Dustins, Risewells, and Freys. Sir Roderick Castle is also rallying a host at Winterfell to repel the invaders. Balon Greyjoy had named himself King of the Iron Islands. Lady Olenna Tyrell. Robb felt his heart drop to his stomach, and his veins turn to ice. There was no way Theon would betray him. They were like brothers. They were family. There had to be a misunderstanding. A lie. Robb had been given his word. If Balon said no, Theon would return to Riverrun. There was no way Theon would ever break his word. He couldn't. Garland frowned as Robb's expression changed from one of confusion to black fury. He looked towards Lord Turley, who looked more grim than usual. What's happened? Balon Greyjoy has placed a crown on his head once again. Tarly explained. He's sent his brother and children to attack the north. Most likely in retaliation for the role Eddard Stark played in the man's failed rebellion. Perhaps it's just a raid. Sir Baelor offered weakly. Mathis Rowan shook his head sadly. Lady Olenna's informants are rarely wrong, he said. Besides, if Balon's put a crown on his head, it's the Iron Fleet. I'll take his bloody head, Robb muttered angrily, throwing the letter on the desk in front of him. Fucking foolish idea. Garland shared a confused look with the others. Your Grace? He asked, worriedly. He had seen Robb angry before, like when he had arrived at the trial. Loras was holding at Bitterbridge, but this was far worse. Robb had the desire to kill in his eyes. Robb's eyes were like shards of ice. I sent Theon to his father in the hopes of allying myself to the Ironborn. He left the same day I came south to treat with Renly. He had orders to return to Riverrun if his father refused. He growled. Instead, he betrayed me. You did what you thought was right, Garland said, trying to make an excuse for Robb, but the Northern King shook his head. I was a fool, Garland. There is no excuse, Robb barked. I trusted the wrong people, and now my home is being attacked. Turta nodded. All is not lost, Your Grace. The Ironborn are not frontline fighters, nor are they particularly known for their strategy. Lord Bolton and Ser Roderick will see them off in due time. I'll write a message to Roose. Tell him that Theon is to be captured. I want to kill him myself. Robb said. Lord Redwyne, how fast can your fleet make it up the coast? A week. Maybe more, if the winds are fair, Paxter answered. The Redwyne fleet had been assembled at the Arbor when Renly declared himself king, but it had never been ordered to move just yet. It was one of the four most powerful navies in Westeros, next to the Royal Iron and Western fleets. Will you be able to join them? Garland asked. Lord Redwyne tilted his head, thinking, if I ride like 7 hells for the coast, I should be able to meet them just north of the Shield Islands. Do it, Robb said. If Balon Greyjoy wants to invade my home, I'll remind him what it feels like. Lord Tarly nodded. Retaliation must be swift and harsh, he said, agreeing with Robb. Robb tapped the desk in front of him, thoughtfully. He was trying to push the thoughts of Thesauon's betrayal to the side, so that he could focus on the now. He was going to march north to Riverrun and meet up with his northern army. From there, he could split up his force to attack the Iron Islands, finish the campaign in the Westerlands, and attack the Lannisters. Lord Redwyne, bring your fleet up to Lannisport and blockade the port until it is time to invade the islands, Robb ordered. The rest of us here will march north and meet up with my other host at Riverrun. From there, we will split up. We will have more than enough men to attack the Ironborn, Tywin and the Westerlands. Divide and conquer, Bryce Cairn said fiercely. Robb nodded. Exactly. My enemies have multiplied since I have left the Riverlands, but I have the troops and the commanders to put them all down. Robb growled. We'll make Balon, Tywin, Joffrey, and Theon all pay. Line break. I didn't know how else to tell you this, but now's a better time than later, Garland said as Bryce Cairn closed the door behind him. After Robb had laid out his plan, he had dismissed the others so that he could be by himself. Only Garland had remained in his seat, waiting patiently so that he could be alone with Robb. Robb raised an eyebrow. What? He asked, his anger slowly fading. Margaery is on her way, Garland said. She and our grandmother. Why? Garland shrugged. Besides the fact that the two of you are going to marry, I suspect she wants to go wherever you go. In this case, it seems she's going north. Robb frowned. But we're marching to war, Garland. She stayed in Renly's camp, the Tyrell Knight pointed out. She's been in a war camp before. Robb shook his head. Renly never went to battle. We'll be marching against Tywin. She can't stay in the war camp then. Not with the enemy so close at hand. Garland nodded, conceding the point. Fair, but then again she'll agree that she shouldn't be there anyway. She can be left at Riverrun during the battle, and then join you when we win. Just like how she stayed at Bitterbridge when we marched off to face Stannis. Robb nodded slowly. All right, he conceded. Robb, Garland said, she truly cares for you. She wants to be a good queen, just as we're all sure you'll be a good king. But realize that you are still a stranger to her. Take this moment, before we march off to war and almost certain death, to get to know each other, to become friends before lovers. Do you have a wife? Robb asked curiously. Garland smiled gently, his eyes having a little far-off look as he looked out a window. I do. My Leonette is currently at Highgarden with my mother, he said. He looked back at Robb. There's no one I'd rather be with. Robb smiled. You love her. That much is clear. Do you love Margaery? Robb hesitated. In his heart, he knew he did, but his mind didn't agree. He had only known the girl for a few short weeks. How much could he come up with in that short amount of time? I care for her very much, Robb said finally. I don't believe I've known her long enough to say love, but I do care a great deal for her. Garland raised an eyebrow. What does your heart tell you? I love her, Robb answered instantly. Darla nodded. When it comes to war and politics, think with your head, he said, tapping his temple. But when it comes to love, trust this, he said, tapping his chest where his heart would be. Robb smiled. I thought your grandmother was supposed to be the wise one, he chuckled. Garland grinned. Oh, my sister, grandmother and older brother are smart all right. I got lucky with common sense, he joked. My talents have always been elsewhere, he said, patting the swords at his side. Robb laughed. Aye, fair point, he said, his anger now fully dissipated. When will Margaery arrive? Tomorrow sometime, Garland answered, getting up from his chair. By the way, have you thought about the wedding? To Garland's surprise, Robb nodded. I have. I was thinking Riverrun. The Tyro Knight raised an eyebrow. Is that because that's where your parents were wed? Robb nodded slightly. That is a factor, but it's also because that's where a lot of my family is. When I'm married, I want my brother, uncle, and great-uncle by my side, just as I'm sure Margaery would want her family by her side when she's married. Garland smiled gently. Family is very important to you. A quality that Margaery shares as well. Robb returned the smile. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies, but the pack survives, Robb said sagely, quoting his father. Family is everything to the north, Garland. The knight nodded. As it is to my sister. Oh, Loras may be a bit immature and rash, but we were all brought up on the same main principle. Protect the family. Robb's smile fell slightly. Mine is spread out across the realm, he said gently. Not since Robert Baratheon came to Winterfell has my entire family been in one place. My youngest brothers are in Winterfell. My sisters are in King's Landing. My mother is in the north and Jon is at Riverrun. You will all be together, once again, Your Grace. You just need to have faith, Garland said. Are you a godly man? Robb asked. Garland shrugged. Not particularly, but I enjoy the idea that something is waiting for me after death. Not just the dark unknown. Robb nodded. Fair enough. And you? Robb scratched his jaw. I follow the old gods, just as most of my family does. I'm not sure what there is after death, but I like what the old gods stand for. But death, I assume that when I die, I join the old gods and look over my family and descendants. Religion is always tricky, Garland admitted. That and politics have always turned brother against brother. Robb chuckled. Alright, but it makes men act better than they might usually. So it has its uses. Garland chuckled as well. Aye, it does. He bowed to Robb. I will leave you be, Your Grace. Garland, Robb said, stopping the knight before he was gone. Garland turned, an eyebrow raised. Thank you. The Septon 4. The Septon breathed slowly as he hid next to the giant tree, his eyes locked on the woodland trail in front of him. He and 200 other Ironborn were hidden on either side of the track, waiting for the northern relief force marching down the path. The Septon had put out a full screen of scouts to the east as he and his raiders moved through the forest, and the results had been fruitful. His scouts had soon reported a large force, perhaps 500 men moving through the woods towards the stony shore. Both forces were on a collision course. What had worried Theon was who was leading the force. It was Ser Roderick Castle, the old master-at-arms of Winterfell. He was not pleased with seeing the old knight again. He thought that he was still in the south, at Riverrun, where Lady Stark would no doubt be. Perhaps Robb had sent the knight north when he had heard of the Ironborn attack, but there was no way the castle had made it north so quickly. There was also another man who rode with Ser Roderick, which Theon guessed was Claes Serwyn, the heir to Castle Serwyn, if his tabard was any indication. Theon had seen him fight in the occasional tourney at Winterfell. He was good, better than most, and would most certainly take a lot of Theon's raiders with him if he was going to die fighting. Dagmar shifted his bulk, easing himself into a more comfortable position in the west snow. The raider had placed himself right next to Theon, a battered foghorn in his hand that would act as the signal to attack. The old man had a fearsome grin on his face, clearly excited for the upcoming fight. From the tramp of feet and the slight thunder of hooves, the northern reinforcements were now very close. Ser Odric did not quiet his men, whose voices could be heard well down the trail. Apparently, the old knight felt confident in the Wolfswood, which was understandable. Not many would assume that the Ironborn would be so far inland, or be on the same trail that led from Winterfell to the coast. But Datsun wasn't like more Ironborn. The ensign eased the bow off his shoulder, and drew an arrow from his quiver. All around him, the forest came alive for a moment, as men grabbed their weapons, grinning fiercely to one another. They were used to swift and bloody surprise attacks, sneaking up on unsuspecting towns and villages and hitting them when they were unprepared. This was their style of fighting. They sat on the side quietly, shifting so that his pant leg, his knee already drenched with mud and water, was a little more comfortable. He and his men had been hidden for at least an hour, waiting for the enemy. As they waited, the Septon tried to reason with himself why he was doing. So far, most of his actions had been motivated by his desire to show his father and the rest of his family that he was an Ironborn and deserving of the name Greyjoy. That's why he wanted to take Winterfell. Yet he didn't feel like an Ironborn raider, but like a man posing as one. Wearing the armor, killing Northerners, it didn't feel right to him. When he had fought next to Robb at the Whispering Wood, that had felt right. But there was no going back now. Benford's words ran through his bread without pause. Theon, the traitor. Theon the Turncloak. Finally, just like at the Whispering Wood, Theon began to hear the light thunder of horse hooves pounding on the trail. It was not like the rolling thunder, the sound that had heralded the arrival of the Blackfish and the Kingslayer, along with their hundreds of men. This was more like surf slamming onto the coast during a storm. The northern host rounded the bend and came into view, marching at a brisk pace. At their head, just as was reported, was Ser Rodrik and Clay Serwyn, both with masks of grim purpose, a look most Northmen had perfected at an early age. The Septon once heard the Kingslayer call it thunderous rectitude. Ser Rodrik wore ringmail armor with a long sword and dagger at his side. On his head was his steel helm, the same one Theon remembered Arya wearing when King Robert entered Winterfell. Seeing the man again was more of a sad occasion rather than a shocking event. Theon didn't want to kill the knight, but he knew it would end up happening. Everyone in this host needed to be killed so that Theon's attack on Winterfell wasn't given away by any stragglers. Clay Serwyn certainly looked like a man ready for war. He wore plated leather with steel pauldrons and a steel gorget. A tabard bearing the twin axes of House Serwyn covered his armored chest. He wore a broadsword and had a steel buckler strapped to his saddle. Slung over one shoulder was a double-bladed black steel battle-axe. Lysanen watched as the enemy began to move past where his Ironborn were positioned. When they were nearly to where Theon, he nodded to Dagmar. The old raider raised the horn to his lips and blew, creating an ear-shattering blast that startled the northern host as their eyes were drawn to the woods around them that were suddenly filled with Ironborn raiders. And stood and with one fluid motion, drew back on his bow so that the fletching of the arrow tickled the side of his face. His aim was set on Ser Rodrik, who had drawn his sword and was bellowing orders to his men. Dan was an excellent shot and had a clear view of the old man's neck. He fired, watching as the arrow went cleanly through Clay Serwyn's throat. The northern host fell to confusion as arrows came from the shadows, striking down northerners where they stood. Within a few moments, more than 50 northerners had been either killed or wounded by the first volley, but the arrows did not stop. Ser Rodrik attempted to regain control of his men, but that's when Dagmar and the infantry struck. The old raider roared and ran from his hiding spot as dozens of Ironborn ran out of the woods, waving their axes and swords over their heads. From the east and south came more raiders as Theon's plan was executed to bloody perfection. The son of Bel and Greyjoy continued to fire arrow after arrow into the mass of Northmen as they tried to form a defensive formation, but it mattered little at this point. The raiders were on them like rabid dogs, claiming 2 or 3 northern warriors for every Ironborn that was cut down. With the northern infantry distracted, Theon turned his attention to the cavalry, who were cutting his raiders down with terrifying ruthlessness. With the last of his quiver, he put down a dozen horses, taking careful aim to place arrows right behind the left shoulders of the beasts. Other archers began to follow his lead as well, turning the horses into pincushions until they were unable to stand, causing their riders to be thrown into the mud, creating easy targets for the raiders. With no more arrows, Theon drew his sword and jogged towards the fight, crossing the last few meters at a sprint as he entered the fray, his sword rising and falling as he carved a swathe through the infantry. He didn't bother looking into their faces. There was a good chance a few of them knew who he was. And he knew them. The faces he did see were of old men with gray beards and slow reflexes, and young boys with eyes filled with fear. Theon ignored it all, continuing to stab and hack with all his might. His sword was covered in gore. He continued to splatter himself with scarlet. He didn't care. He kept going forward. Theon kept this up for an hour. Hack, stab, thrust, parry, stab, hack, stab, keep going forward. He heard nothing. He felt nothing, immune to the carnage that was happening around him. It was almost an out-of-body experience for the young noble. He was no longer in control of his body, but could not stop the horror that was in front of him. In a moment of clarity, Theon heard the roar of Dagmar as he fought someone, spitting curses and abuse. It was then he realized how far he had strayed from the center of the battle. He was now closer to where his hiding place had been, and the still body of Clissawen was close by. Sir Rodrik fought next to his downed horse, his face and armor covered with mud and blood from where he had fallen. Even at his age, the warrior had claimed his fair share of kills, most likely men who saw an old man and thought he would be a quick and effortless kill. Sir Rodrik had fought in 2 wars and numerous single combats. Theon remembered watching him on the tourney field. The man was as graceful as a danger, and as ferocious as a dire wolf. The 2 old warriors threw themselves at each other with differing approaches, but still showing that age was just a number to them. Castle fought with controlled fury, his feet perfectly positioned, his sword moving like an extension of his arm. Dagmar battered the old knight like a sea storm, his battle axe a whirling circle of light that attacked with devastating power, all while the old raider screamed abuse at his opponent. The Fandom began to move towards the fight, slowly at first till he was sprinting across the field. He was constantly stopped by Northerners who recognized him as the leader of the raiders, but they were cut down without a second thought. Theon only had eyes for the 2 old men fighting. No one else mattered. The fight was over before the Khan reached the pair. Dagmar stepped to the side, avoiding a blow that would have split him from brain to balls. With a mighty roar, the raider's battle-axe came down and took off Rodrik's hand at the wrist. To the man's credit, Castle didn't cry out, but sunk to his knees in front of the raider, holding the bloody stump with his good hand. Dagmar smiled grimly, hefting his axe again. "Well fought," he said, before binging his axe down in a savage strike, cleanly cutting through flesh and bone as he took the knight's head off. The septon reached Dagmar just as Rodrik's head rolled to a stop in the mud, the undead, half-lidded eyes staring at Theon with damning sadness. The younger man was full of unknown emotion. He didn't know if it was sadness, happiness, or some undefinable emotion that was a mix of both. Whatever it was, Theon wanted it to stop. Dagmar clapped Theon on the shoulder, turning him so that they were both watching the last of the northern host be put to the sword. The ground was littered with dead, but it was obvious that the majority were northerners. The raiders walked among the dead, putting the injured to the sword, helping their comrades where they could. Others simply looted the bodies, claiming victory trophies. "Well done, lad," Dagmar laughed. "We certainly fucked them up." The Thane nodded, his eyes roaming the bodies, noticing for the first time faces that he used to know. He had been protected by them, he had trained with them, hunted with them, they had families and children who they would never see again. He had killed them. He had gone too far now. He had gone too far when he had killed Tallheart back at the village, on the coast. He was committed to attacking Winterfell, and he had no choice but to keep moving forward. "Collect whatever arrows you can, clean your weapons, and take what you need," Theon said, taking charge. "We leave in an hour. We have a castle to take." Catelyn III. Catelyn stood on the battlements over the main gates, staring out over the road and the small town it went through. Sir Rodrik had promised to send a rider back when he and his men had retaken Deepwood Motte. The old knight had taken nearly 600 men, stripping the strong garrison that Robb had left at Winterfell in addition to the men that Crissaron had brought with him from Castle Saren. They had left almost a week ago, and Catelyn knew that it was only a few days' ride to the seat of the Glovers. Quicker if there were men who knew the Wolfswood, which there undoubtedly were. Then there would be a siege and the taking of the castle itself. Catelyn wasn't sure how many raiders held Deepwood Motte, but she hoped that Roderick would take the castle quickly and return with the men meant to tot at Winterfell. As much as she tried not to, the Lady of Winterfell was beginning to worry. Tyrion knew that her home was far from the ocean, but she couldn't help but worry about the castle being attacked. Winterfell was a great stronghold, but it had less than half of the garrison her son had left behind. Little more than 200 men, most of which were poorly trained villagers who looked like warriors, but most certainly weren't. Finally, after more than an hour of waiting, the cold became too much, and Catelyn retired to Ned's Solar, where she had taken over ruling Winterfell and the north in Robb's stead. Her son Bran had done a marvelous job, but Catelyn slightly enjoyed having work to keep her mind off the south and her eldest. Inside the room, Maester Luwin was waiting patiently, a handful of raven messages in his hands. "My lady," he said, bowing when Catelyn entered. Catelyn nodded slightly, taking her seat at the desk. "Are those messages from the other northern lords?" Luwin nodded, placing the small pieces of parchment neatly down on the desk. "They are, my lady. Lord Wyman is currently sending 300 men under his cousin Sir Marlon. Arnulf Karstark is also marching 200 men from Karhold. Finally, there has been word from the twins that Lord Roose Bolton is marching north with his men, along with those of House Dustin and House Ryswell," the Maester explained. "There also seems to be men mustering to the Dreadfort, no doubt also the work of Lord Bolton." "What of House Umber?" Catelyn asked, "or House Hornwood?" Luwin shook his head. "I'm afraid neither house can send aid, my lady. They sent many men south with King Robb, and would not have enough to collect the harvest if they sent men south to Winterfell." Catelyn huffed but nodded. "Very well. Has there been any word from the Rills or Barrowtown?" Luwin shook his head again. "Lady Barbrey nor her father have returned any of the ravens I have sent. It seems that they are keeping their men back to protect themselves." Catelyn sighed in annoyance. "When the Ironborn are repelled, I want a message sent to my son, telling him of their reluctance to protect the north," she ordered. She had watched her father struggle with the phrase and had no wish to see her son deal with the same problem. She had asked Ned a dozen or so times during their marriage what had happened that destroyed the relationship between Barrowtown, the Rills, and Winterfell, but her husband had never given her a good answer. "It was my fault." It was Ned's customary answer to Catelyn's questions that he refused to answer. She received the same answer when she had asked about the bastard's mother and what had happened to Lyanna Stark. Whatever had happened between Barbrey Dustin, Roderick Ryswell, and her husband was an answer Catelyn had to wait for. Luwin bowed slightly. "Of course. Is there anything else I should know?" Catelyn asked, glancing at the raven messages before putting them off to the side. Luwin shook his head. "There's been word from Bear Island. Their largest fishing village was hit when Deepwood Motte and Torrens Square were, but the keep was not taken," Catelyn asked. Luwin shook his head. "Even with overwhelming numbers, the Ironborn did not attempt to take the keep. They instead went back to their boats and sailed off." Catelyn sighed, rubbing her head. The Ironborn were hitting the north all along the coastline, all except for Eagle's Roost. That was one place that not even the Ironborn would attack. Not without thousands and thousands of men and quite a lot of courage. She knew the story of Havre Arneder Hawker. It was a popular one in the north, especially after Balon Greyjoy's first failed rebellion. Bowden Hawker, captain of the Seahawk and commanders of the Western Fleet, was still making his way back north. The Castellan of Flint's Fingers sent a raven not long ago, saying that Bowden had made it to Cape Kraken. Unfortunately, the elements seemed to be against the man, as he was having to row the entire way north. A slow and arduous process that would leave many of his fighters tired. "We'll rally what men we can here," she said tiredly. "Sir Marlon will take whatever force we can muster and march south to help Torrens Square." "My lady, should I send a rider to the mountain clans?" Luwin asked. Catelyn shook her head. "Leave them be," she answered. "If we need their help, we'll ask." Even after years of living in the north and having met many of the mountain clan chieftains, she had always been wary of them. They were not like any nobles that she had met before. If they could even be called nobles, they were gargantuan, boisterous men who treated her husband with the greatest respect. But she wasn't her husband. She wasn't sure if they would answer her call for help. Luwin hesitated but nodded. It was obvious that the older maester disagreed with the decision, but he didn't say anything. He bowed once more. "With your leave, my lady," he said before leaving. Captain watched him go before turning her attention to the stack of reports and messages that required her opinion and notice. Besides the war effort, there were still reports on the harvest happening across the north, not to mention conflicts between lords and farmers, and now there were reports on the survivors of the Ironborn raids. Most were streaming into Barrowtown, Winterfell, or Eagle's Roost, but there were pitifully few. The north was vast, and it was a trek to get anywhere, especially on foot. Very few made it to safety, especially those with wounds or who were sick. The Lady of Winterfell was doing all she could to help the survivors, feeding them and helping them find shelter among the generous people of Wintertown. For those who were strong enough, she had put them to work helping with the harvest. She hated to do it, but like the Umbers and Hornwoods had said, they needed all the hands they could to bring in the harvest before it went bad. Catelyn sighed and started to go through the reports. She hadn't had very long to spend time with her children, as she had immediately taken charge when she had entered Winterfell, sending messages across the north and taking over as ruler of Winterfell. According to Luwin, Rickon wasn't very happy, but Bran and the woman Osha were doing all they could to keep the boy entertained. Catelyn longed to spend time with her children, having been away from them for so long, but she couldn't leave the desk. There was so much to take care of, and she could hardly step away. There were also the children of Howl and Reed, Jojen and Mira, whom Catelyn hadn't properly met yet. They had arrived for the Harvest Festival a few weeks ago, and had stayed in Winterfell, befriending both Bran and Rickon. There was so much going on in the south that Catelyn thought it best to retire to the north, hoping to get away from the bloodshed and heartache. Instead, she walked from one war zone into another. Line break. Catelyn's eyes shot open as she heard the sounds of metal crunching into wood. She sat up in bed, pulling the covers up close to her chest, watching in horror as the axe head sheared through her door, causing a gap wide enough for her to see who her assailants were. They wore dark leathers and chainmail with pothelms. Some carried square shields and the majority wielded axes. If their attire and weapons didn't give them away, the emblem on their chests and shields was unmistakable. It was the Golden Kraken of House Greyjoy. The Ironborn were attacking Winterfell. The door finally swung open after a few more axe strokes broke the wooden lock. Half a dozen men swarmed in, dragging the Lady of Winterfell from her bed. Catelyn tried to fight them off, clawing and raking at them, yelling and shouting, but it did nothing. Not only were they far stronger than her, but they were also wearing armor. Catelyn was dragged from the room and through the castle, watching helplessly as more Ironborn raiders ran through the halls, the cries and screams of men and women following wherever they went. She tried her best to keep her eyes from roaming her home, not wanting to see her innocent maids and servants assaulted and abused by the invaders. Finally, Catelyn was brought to the main hall, where more of her household was sitting in the middle of the room. Bran was there, lying awkwardly, as two other children sat next to him, protectively. Rickon was also there, crying softly. The wildling, Osha, was by him, trying to soothe him. One of her eyes was black and swollen, her reward for trying to fight off the invaders. Luwin was also there, on his knees and still dressed in his grey robe and maester chain. In all the time Catelyn had known the old maester, he had been calm and reserved. He had never once raised his voice or even glared. That was not the case. The maester's face was dark with fury as he glared at the other person in the hall. Lounging on the throne of winter, where Eddard Stark and Robb Stark had ruled Winterfell, sat Theon Greyjoy, twirling an arrow in his hand. Standing next to the chair was a stout, older man with a terrible cut running down his mouth, forming his lips into 4 separate parts. He was grinning evilly as Catelyn was dragged into the room. Grasped in both hands and leaning on his shoulder was a battle axe, the iron head stained with blood. "Lady Stark, how nice of you to join us," Theon said, gazing at Catelyn. "I hope my men didn't treat you too badly." For a moment, Catelyn couldn't even speak. She was so shocked at seeing Theon before her, dressed like the raiders who had grabbed her from her bed. He was leaner, as if he hadn't eaten in the last few days. His beard was also scruffier and untamed, but he still had that arrogant look in his eye and a smirk on his face. Catelyn soon overcame her shock and was filled with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" The Fenton raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it obvious?" he asked as Catelyn was shoved to the ground with the rest of her family. "Winterfell is mine. You betrayed my son," Catelyn growled. "My husband raised you. Eddard Stark took me from my home, my family." Theon snapped, stabbing the arrow into the armrest of the chair as he sat up. I am simply repaying the favor. Robb trusted you, Captain cried. Robb freed me, Theon barked. My father has a long memory, Lady Stark. He has not forgotten the part the North played in his rebellion all those years ago. Theon now stood up, walking slowly towards Catelyn. Now we will have our revenge. Catelyn had always been a little sharper than her siblings. Learning history, arithmetic, and all the other lessons from her maester had been easy for her. Now her quick mind betrayed her in the worst moment. She knew that the only way Theon had made it to Winterfell without anyone knowing was through the Wolf's Wood. He had grown up in the castle and knew the trails through the dark forest. It was the same path Sir Rodrik had taken. What have you done to Ser Rodrik? Catelyn asked, her voice low and full of venom. Septon turned to the other man, who pulled a long sword from his belt, the blade still stained with blood. He tossed the sword to Theon, who caught it and began to examine it in front of Catelyn. I'm afraid Ser Rodrik won't be saving anyone, he said, with mock sadness. Nor will Clay Serwyn. What did you do? Catelyn growled. Theon smirked. Isn't it obvious? He asked, throwing the sword on the ground, causing Catelyn to recoil slightly. They're dead, Oathbreaker, Ulsha snarled. Theon stepped forward and backhanded the woman, causing her to fall to the ground fully. I'd watch how you speak, he growled, stepping back and looking at Catelyn now. You speak to the Prince of Winterfell. Roose sighed. Your master has a lot of nerve sending you here, Roose said quietly, crossing his arms as he glared at the man. Standing across from him was Sarasaratras Soaft, the Knight of Cornfield. What's to stop me from killing here and now and sending your head back to Tywin? Sire Harris did not look like a normal knight. Most of the time, the man wore yellow steel plate decorated with the blue rooster of his house. Now, he wore black leather clothes and a dull yellow cloak. They were not even the man's finest leathers, but of course, the man wasn't trying to be noticed. As of now, he looked more like a common messenger than the master of Cornfield. He almost succeeded too, but he held himself like he always had. As a knight, with the stereotypical arrogance that came with the title. Roose and his modest host of 7,000 men were currently camped at Mos Glean as he sent ravens to the Ryswells and Dustins. The Leech Lord was also planning on how he was going to sweep the Ironborn back into the sea. From what he knew, Torrhen Square and Deepwood Motta were still under Ironborn control, and Bode and Hawker had yet to get past Flint's Finger. Men were rallying at Winterfell as well, as commanded by Lady Catelyn. Rose's bastard, Ramsay Snow, was also rallying what men he could at the Dreadfort to bring to Winterfell. Roose had been surprised when Sarah Harris had arrived at the ruined northern stronghold, although he did not show it. Roose did not know the man personally, only that he fled south to Tywin after the Battle of the Camps. The knight shrugged. I go where I am commanded, he answered simply. Roose raised an eyebrow. From a knight to a mere messenger, how tragic a punishment for fleeing the battlefield. Tell me what Lord Lannister wants, then leave. I am already committing treason just by speaking with you. The Swift ignored the insult and pulled a message from his belt and handed it to Bolton, who took it. Lord Tywin only requires your answer. Roose broke the red wax seal and unrolled the scroll, taking a moment to read it. The message was simple. He was asking Roose to switch his loyalties and help Tywin take down Robb Stark. As a reward, Roose would become Warden of the North, and the Boltons would become the prominent house in the North. The old lion had also promised to legitimize Roose's bastard, giving him a true heir. Tywin also outlined who else had already agreed. A man whose host of 4,000 strong was already among Rose's own force. The Freys had agreed to turn their cloaks on the Starks in exchange for a few marriages from Tywin's cousins, and the promise that 2 of the Kingsguard would have a free squire. Finally, Tywin promised that the Freys would be named Lord Paramounts of the Riverlands, since Edmure Tully and his uncle would not survive the war. Do you know what this says? Roose asked carefully. Swift nodded. I do, he replied, easily. A man by the name of Lothar Frey has arrived with me to take care of some matters with his family. Black Walder is now the leader of the Frey host. Roose frowned. Bold of you to assume that I had already agreed to Tywin's terms. Harris shrugged again. Why would you not? Robb Stark has put aside many of his northern bannermen in favor of his new southern allies. He also is set to marry a southern girl. Do you think he gives a shit about his northern bannermen? He is the reason why the North is now under attack. He let the Greyjoy boy go home to his father. Robb Stark will lead you all to ruin, Lord Bolton. Are you prepared to follow him? Roose had to admit the knight had a point. Stark was the reason why half of the north was infested by Ironborn. The Leech Lord wasn't even sure if the boy knew what had happened. If Robb Stark truly cared about his homeland, he would have never trusted a Greyjoy, even one that had grown up with him. A severe lack of judgment on the young man's part. If Robb Stark was also truly betrothed to a southern girl, then it would be the first time in a very long time that the Lord of Winterfell had not married a northern girl. Something that would surely disappoint many other northern lords. Stark's new southern allies have a mighty host, Rose commented. How does Tywin plan to deal with them? Harris waved aside Bolton's question. The Tyrells have always been a greedy family. When Robb Stark dies, and Lord Tyrell will ensure that he does, Mace Tyrell and his family will join the winning side, as they have always done. That is the Reachman. My countrymen will never give in to the Lannisters, Rose countered. The Starks are beloved. Even the great Tywin Lannister must acknowledge that. Harris smirked. Why not? Their king will be dead, and who better to follow than the man who saved the North from the Ironborn invaders? Invaders who unfortunately killed Robb Stark's siblings and mother. Roose was beginning to see what Tywin wanted. There was still one thing that worried him. Tywin has, 20,000 men. Nothing against the might of the Reach. Stormlands, Riverlands, and the North. All of which Stark has allied sworn to the crown he wears on his head. Harris folded his hands behind his back. If you think Lord Tywin is devoid of allies, you are badly mistaken, he said. The lords of the Blackwater have realized who their lawful king is, and are joining their fellow Crownlanders at Duskendale. Lord Tywin has also reached agreements with the Vale and Dorne. Roose raised an eyebrow. The Vale and Dorne? You truly want me to believe that Tywin Lannister has allied with men who watched Ned Stark grow up, and the Martells who have a grudge against the Lannisters? He argued. Has Tywin also enlisted the aid of the warrior as well, that of the faith militant? I assume they shall be at the battle as well. Harris shook his head. Not a word I said was false. Lord Petyr Baelish, King Joffrey's master of coin, is set to marry Lady Lysa Arryn very soon. He will then take over as Lord Protector of the Vale, and the Knights of the Vale will march to Lord Tywin's aid. Roose rolled his eyes. If Lord Tywin truly believes that, then his reputation falls well short of the mark. Eddard Stark grew up in the Vale. It was the first region to rise against the Targaryens in defense of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark. If he believes that Joffrey's banker can convince them to fight against the very men they fought with in the past 2 wars, then you are all fools. Harris's eyes narrowed. The Terbecs and Rains called Lord Tywin a fool, and now there is a song about how they are extinct. Roose sighed in annoyance and boredom. What of Dorne? If my memory serves me right, Gregor Clegane and Armory Lorch butchered Elia Martell and her children. What did Tywin give up for their help? Casterly Rock itself? Princess Marcella has been promised to Prince Doran's son. The Red Viper is rallying his countrymen, as we speak. Harry said, 60,000 men from the south and east, another 20,000 at Duskendel, and a full host at Harrenhal, all under the command of Tywin Lannister, who has never lost a war. Robb Stark has not lost a battle yet, Roose pointed out. Harris scoffed. Robb Stark has danced a pretty dance, but the music is done playing, and soon the boy's world will crumble around him, as Tywin shows him why he is the most dangerous man in Westeros. The Knight of Cornfield nodded at the message in Rose's hand. Lord Tywin will win this war. Of that there is no doubt. He is offering you a chance to join the winner's table. I advise that you take it. Rose tapped the table thoughtfully. If what the man said was true, then Rose could easily take the north while Robb Stark was destroyed in the Riverlands by Tywin and his new allies. Bolton could then blame the deaths of Catelyn, Tully, and her children on the Ironborn. Then, like snow in the sun, House Stark would be extinct, leaving House Bolton as the dominant house in the north, as they should have been. Roose would also be seen as the savior of the north if he repelled the Ironborn, which would be easy enough. They were terrible fighters when not on their ships. Lord Bolton, why are we wasting time before you acknowledge that you have already accepted Lord Lancelster's terms? Swift asked. Roose nodded. I accept Tywin's terms, he said, throwing the letter into a burning brazier. This will stay between us, of course.
Herrey's nodded.
Wise decision, my lord. King Joffrey will make his official decree, making your house rulers of the north as soon as I return to Harrenhal. Roose waved his hand, gesturing for the man to leave. You can leave now, he ordered. Soreft bowed and left, leaving the Leech Lord alone to bask quietly in satisfaction. His house will now be in its rightful place, as rulers of the north, and no one is there to stop him from destroying the remaining Starks. Line break. Ramsay, the man known as the Bastard of the Dreadfort, smiled giddily as he read his father's letter. It was more than he had ever dreamed since he had set his plan in motion to become his father's heir. First, he had killed that naive fool Domeric, taking his rightful place as his father's heir. Since then, he had been looking for a way to legitimize himself. Now his answer was held in his hands. What are you giggling like a girl about? Arnulf Karstark barked as he entered the dining hall, his cane marking his every step. The Castellan of Karhold was a gaunt, crooked man with uneven shoulders, squinty eyes, a scrawny neck, and a ragged beard. To Ramsay, who was young and strong, Arnulf was a pathetic excuse of a man. The same went for the man's two sons, Cragen and Arthur. House Stark is in quite the perilous place, my lord, Ramsay responded happily. Arnulf eyed the younger man carefully. That sounds close to treason, boy. Ramsay raised an eyebrow and got up from his seat, walking over to the stooped man. Ramsay was large-boned and had the same cold, pale eyes as his father, making him far more intimidating than the crooked Castellan of Karhold. At his side was a dagger, the hilt made of yellow bone. Ramsay's hand fell to it now. There was no smile on his face. King Joffrey has named House Bolton Lord Paramount of the North, Ramsay said. House Stark will soon be extinct. Arnulf's eyes went wide as the bastard spoke. Well, but do you have something you want to say, my lord? Ramsay asked, his voice just barely above a whisper, the unveiled threat hanging in the air. Arnulf bowed his head slightly. No, he answered quietly. Ramsay nodded, smiling once more. Perfect, he cried, clapping his hands on the old man's shoulders. Now, we have much to do. What's that? Arnulf asked. Why, we have to kill the rest of the Starks, Ramsay said, talking to the man like one would talk about the weather. Now would you be so kind as to go assemble the men? We leave at midday. Arnulf nodded and left, his cane clacking a little quicker with his departure. Ramsay watched him go, the smile still plastered to his face until the old man was gone. Then the smile was gone. Reek, Ramsay barked. The old, sickly-looking man was instantly at Ramsay's side. His stench made the man unbearable to be around, but Ramsay had lived with the man for the majority of his life. There was no one Ramsay trusted more. Yes, master, Reek wheezed. Watch the fucker, Ramsay growled, still staring at the door Arnulf had left through. If you see him trying to get word to Winterfell, kill him. Yes, master, Reek said, leaving. Reek, Ramsay called after his servant. Yes, master. Don't kill him. Bring him to the room, Ramsay said, a cruel, gleeful smile coming over his face again. If any of his men or his sons get in the way, kill them. Reek laughed harshly. Yes, master, he responded before leaving. Tyrion sex. Tyrion watched, rather pleased with himself, as the small party of lords made their way forward. Joffrey was holding court, something that Tyrion had asked him to do, so that he could publicly accept the lords of the Blackwater's oaths of loyalty. The acting hand to the king had used all his political know-how to bring the lords of the Blackwater to the Lannister cause, which was not an easy task, given that the might of 4 kingdoms stood against them. Tyrion had offered everything from land to marriages to more trade options with other parts of Essos. He had also accepted around half a dozen wards to be taken in and raised in King's Landing. Thankfully, Tyrion's hard work had brought 5,000 more men to his father's aid. Along with dozens of ships, the royal fleet had returned to King's Landing after Stannis' death, giving Joffrey a fleet of his own, although nothing compared to the Red Wine or Iron Fleet. But now that number had doubled with the additions of the Crownlander lords. The new ships were sorely needed, as Tyrion's plan of sailing food into the capital had met a massive roadblock. House Veleen, according to Lord Teltagar, was the only Crownlander house to pledge its loyalty to Robb Stark after Stannis' defeat. Now, a small fleet loyal to the Stark King used Driftmark as a base of operations to disrupt ships going in and out of King's Landing, led by the Onion Knight on the former flagship of the royal fleet, Fury. Just like when the man was with Stannis, Davos Seaworth was annoyingly good at what he was doing, especially since he had the help of 24 Lycian pirate ships, along with Orena Waters, one of the better captains in Blackwater Bay. Together, the small group had taken and burned more than a dozen ships that Tyrion had sent out to barter for food from Pentos and Bravos. Tyrion hoped that he would be able to take out the rebels with the newly reformed royal fleet. With them out of the way, Tyrion's plan then had an actual chance to work. The food shortage in the city was reaching new highs, and the gold cloaks under Ser Jocelyn were having a tough time keeping the peace. "Welcome, my lords," Joffrey announced happily from his place on the Iron Throne. At his side, as always, was his mother, while other members of the small council stood nearby. Adrian Celtigar led the group of men who knelt before the young king. "Your Grace, we have come to pledge our loyalty to you as the true king of Westeros, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and King of the Andals, Rhoynar, and First Men." Cersei smiled sweetly. "Rise, my lords, and be recognized as true bannermen to the king." The men rose, bowed once more, and moved off to the side of the room, as the court clapped politely, welcoming the new men. Tyrion wasn't sure how much the courtiers knew of the war, or the dire position House Lannister was in. If they did, they would no doubt flee the capital while they could, like rats from a sinking ship. Joffrey continued to take petitioners for another few hours before dismissing the court for the day. The boy king had grown tired of hearing his people complain to him and looked like he wanted to do nothing more than play with his crossbow or go abuse his siblings. Tyrion had asked Cersei about having Joffrey trained with a sword, and to his surprise, Cersei said that he was their cousin, Lancel Lancels. Trained him every morning along with Ser Solsoarin, Trant, the man who had taken over as Lord Commander, until Jaime was freed. Tyrion had argued that Joffrey should be trained by someone with a bit more skill, suggesting Sarais Oakheart or Saramandon Moore, two of the more capable members of the less-than-talented group. But Ceri had waved aside his suggestion, stating that Joffrey was in perfect hands of Lancel and Meryn. Now Tyrion entered his office, where Pod was waiting with a small stack of messages. While Joffrey and Cersei got to go do as they please and cause chaos and mischief, Tyrion was still busy making sure that the small bit of realm that Joffrey still controlled was still standing. Pod, how are we today?" Tyrion asked, waddling over to his chair and hopping into it, instantly pouring himself a glass of wine. The young man nodded quickly. "I am well, my lord," he greeted formally. "How is training with Bronn?" Pod hesitated. "It's good, my lord," the boy stuttered. "It's not exactly knightly training, but it's still very good." Tyrion resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Of course, Bronn wasn't going to teach the boy how to fight like a knight. The sellsword was the furthest thing Tyrion had ever met from a knight. But he would teach the boy how to survive a fight, and that's what Tyrion cared about. "Ah, well, I'm sure we can sort that out later when we find you a proper teacher," Tyrion said easily. "For now, continue to train with Bronn. He's very good with that overgrown toothpick of his." Pod smiled slightly before realizing that he still had a stack of messages. He set them down on the desk, gesturing to the top piece. "From Lord Tywin, my lord." Tyrion raised an eyebrow, unfolding the message and quickly reading it. His father's words were simple, to the point, and utterly mad. There was no way he expected Tyrion to try and make this happen. If it was any other man, the acting hand would have laughed it off as a joke. Tyrion's father never joked. "Pod, will you go ask my sister to join me?" Tyrion asked quietly, setting the message down on his desk. His squire bowed and left. Tyrion waited patiently, just staring at the message, until his sister arrived. She glared at her younger brother, obviously not happy that she had been summoned. She went to speak, but Tyrion held up a hand, waving for Pod to close the door and leave. When the boy was gone, Tyrion gestured for his sister to take a seat, pouring her a glass of wine. "I have news," he said quietly, trying to hold off what was about to come. Cersei rolled her eyes. "Speak plainly. I have no patience for your games." Tyrion pushed the little piece of parchment towards her. "I got this from father. He wants me to set up an alliance with the Martells. He is ordering me to offer them Martell's hand." The blood seemed to drain from Cersei's face as she read the message before throwing it on the desk angrily. She took a drink of her wine, her eyes now blazing with fury. There were many things that Tyrion found unpleasant about his sister, but there were two things he would never be able to argue against. The first was that she was stunningly beautiful. She was known as one of the most beautiful women in Westeros, and Tyrion could easily see why that was so. The second point was that Cersei loved her children. She was fiercely protective of them, like a lioness with her cubs. She indulged Joffrey too much, feeding his power-hungry nature, but she loved Tommen and Myrcella just as much as she loved Joffrey. It was one of her better qualities. "Bloody madness," she muttered, gazing darkly at the letter. "Father is wrong." Cersei had always been headstrong, the only one with the courage to stand up to their father and say that he was wrong. Of course, whenever she had done so, their father had put her in her place without a pause. Tyrion had always tried to go about it a different way, pointing out where problems might arise with the plan rather than outright calling it wrong. Now, there were too many things wrong with the idea to point out, mainly because the entire plan was outrageous. Tyrion nodded slowly. "In this case, we are in agreement. I'd much rather try to find a marriage in the Vale. Perhaps Myrcella to Robb and Arryn, but seeking an alliance with the Martells seems ignorant, especially after what happened at the end of Robert's rebellion." "Elia Martell," Cersei said. "Indeed," Tyrion said gravely, "but we do not have the luxury of picking and choosing allies. There are very few resources left available to us, and we must snatch them up before it is too late." "You will not sell my daughter," Cersei hissed. "Not like when you tried to sell Joff." "We don't have a choice," Tyrion snapped. "Look at the situation we are in. The situation you and your son put us in. We need allies." Cersei looked ready to reach across the desk and smack Tyrion, but she managed to restrain herself, breathing deeply and finishing off her glass of wine in one go. When she was done, she put the cup down with more force than what was required, nearly breaking the object. "I will send a letter to Prince Doran Martell, offering Myrcella's hand to his youngest son Trystane," Tyrion explained. "Cerys will go with her as protection. Another letter will be sent to the Vale, where Baelish has been altogether too comfortable. He will have an ultimatum. He will have 2 weeks to find a way to forge an alliance between ourselves and the Vale, or return to King's Landing and hope the king doesn't take his head for failing." Tyrion sighed, rubbing his face. "We got lucky, Cersei. The Stark boy marched north, and his home is under attack. We no longer have enemies behind us. Lord Riker can now move forward and join father in the Riverlands." "What about the raiders at Driftmark?" Cersei asked, clearly just as caught up on what was going on around her. "When the rest of the fleet arrives, I will give Lord Celtigar command and have him take Driftmark, capturing Lord Velaryon in the process. With them out of the way, we can hopefully begin bringing in food from Essos." Tyrion explained, "And the Onion Knight and the pirates will be sent to the bottom of the Blackwater." Tyrion answered firmly. Cersei nodded slowly, the anger draining from her till it was just a dull burn. "Is there anything else I or my son should know about?" Tyrion chewed on his lip, debating whether or not to say anything. "I am looking into hiring a company or two from Essos," he admitted. "Most are taken up already, but I am still looking into it." Cersei frowned. "And where will the funds come from?" "House Lannister has an account with the Iron Bank," Tyrion explained. "Father's fallback plan, as it were. It might be enough to get the Second Sons or the wind blown, but the Golden Company is too far out of our price range, especially now that the Westerlands have been pillaged." Cersei sighed. "Very well. I will tell my son that we are finding more allies," she said, getting up. "When will you tell the council about this?" "The next meeting is tomorrow. I should have the details figured out by then." Tyrion said, "I suggest you speak to Myrcella as well, and make sure she knows what might happen." "My daughter's sold like common livestock," Cersei growled quietly. Tyrion bit his tongue, wanting to say that this was Cersei's fault. She allowed her son to kill Ned Stark. If he had stayed alive, then they would have been able to reach an agreement with Robb Stark. Now, all they could do is rely on Tyrion to bring more allies into the fold, and Tyrion to make sure the Stark boy stays north of Harrenhal. "It's the way life is," Tyrion replied grimly. "Sacrifices must be made, and we all must play our part, even one as young and innocent as Myrcella." Cersei sniffed and went to leave. "Cersei," Tyrion said, stopping his sister, "I understand that Joffrey is training with a sword, but please know that he does need to learn in case battle comes to the city. He will have to know how to protect himself. Please have him understand that." Cersei nodded once and walked out, not giving Tyrion an answer. Tyrion. The Theon looked grimly over the Bolton Karstark force that encircled the castle. There were close to 700 Northerners, no doubt all wanting to see Theon and every Ironborn in the castle put to the sword. The self-proclaimed Prince of Winterfell had less than 200 men, not nearly enough to hold the castle, let alone the Great Keep. Dagmer spat over the wall as he walked over to Theon. "A lot of the bloody bastards," he grumbled. The Septon could only nod, his eyes still trained on the Bolton command tent. There was no way Roose Bolton had made it from the Riverlands this far north, so quickly. It had to be someone else.
"Have they given their demands?"
Theron asked. Dagmer held up a bloody arrow with a message looped around the shaft, also splattered with blood. "Found this in one of the sentries' throat," he replied. "Whoever is down there, they have good aim." The Septon grabbed the arrow and unwound the message, conscious of the fact that he and Dagmer had to be well within range of whoever shot the arrow. He gave the arrow back to the old raider as he read the message. The handwriting was horrible, like it had been written by a child who was just learning, but the message was clear enough. There would be no surrender, no terms where the Ironborn could walk away freely. Theon and all his men would be put to the sword, put down like the dogs they were. It was the response Theon was expecting. The Septon cursed softly and threw the letter over the parapets, crossing his arms. "We're well and truly fucked." Dagmer shrugged. "Why don't we give them the Starks?" he offered. "They'll never harm him." The Septon shook his head. "The Starks could very well be the only thing keeping the Northerners back," he countered. "Are there any ways out of this place?" Dagmer asked. The Septon looked over his shoulder towards the Wolfswood, but shook his head again. "The woods would be the safest bet, but they have cavalry. They'd ride us down within minutes." Dagmer huffed and walked away. "Then you best figure out a way to get us the hell out of here, lad," he called over his shoulder as he left. The Tin sighed and resisted the urge to smack himself for his stupidity. It had been one thing after another. First, it was agreeing to his father's mad delusion of kingship. Then it was agreeing with his plan to attack the north, an idea that was even more insane. Then Fred's death and taking Winterfell were just cherries on top of the colossal fuck-up that Theon had gotten himself into. The Septon, Turncloak. That's what Benfred Tallhard had named him, a name that had haunted the son of Balon Greyjoy ever since he had heard it. The Northern warrior had been right. The Septon had sullied his name in the worst way possible, and he would go down in the history books as a traitor. Vadanian shook his head, growling. If he was going to be labeled a traitor, then might as well live up to the name. Line break. "Leave us," the Septon ordered. The two raiders looked at each other and shrugged, leaving the cell full of Starks alone for Theon to speak with. Catelyn stood up, still looking dignified even in a dirty dress and messy hair. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing with hate as she glared at the man who had attacked her home. "What do you want?" she snapped. The Finton crossed his arms. "There's an army of Northmen surrounding the castle," he said simply. "They'll take the castle any day now." Catelyn crossed her arms as well. "Good." Septon shook his head, looking around to make sure they were alone, before continuing. "I am going to set you free," he said quietly, catching the Lady of Winterfell off guard. Catelyn actually took a step back, surprised, but then her eyes narrowed once more. "This is some kind of trick," she snarled. The Septon shook his head. "It's not. I swear on my Hana. I swear on my life that this is no trick. Please, just hear me out." Catelyn was about to snap, but a hand from Maester Luwin stopped her. The old man stepped forward, looking grim, but understanding as he looked at Theon. When Theon had taken Winterfell, he had made sure that the household and the Starks had all been placed in the dungeons. He had done this so that nobody did anything stupid and forced Theon to kill them. "What do you have in mind?" Luwin asked. "Soon, I am going to tell my men that they can escape if they hide in the Godswood tonight. I will tell them that I will walk out alone, with the Starks and hand myself and you all over to the Northerners, and then they can make their escape through the North Gate," the Septon explained, hesitating. Before going on, "I don't think the Northern force can be trusted." Catelyn snorted. "Of course they can. They are my son's bannermen." The Septon shook his head. "I received a letter from their commander, a man by the name of Ramsay Snow. He said that none shall leave Winterfell alive. I don't think he intends to save you." "Ramsay Snow?" Luwin asked curiously. "I remember the name. Lord Stark was looking into the boy for the potential murder of Roose Bolton. There have been terrible tales about the boy. The Septon looked at Lady Stark. I know you don't trust me, and you have no reason to, but I just have a feeling, he explained. I will hide my men in the Godswood. Allow the children to hide in the crypts. If I'm wrong and they are here to save you, then you can simply collect them after I turn myself and you over to the Northern Force. If not, then they will be safe. Catelyn sighed, looking at Maester Luwin, who was staring at Theon with a mixture of sadness and respect. Why should I not go with my children? Catelyn asked. If you and I walk out, it will make the illusion true. Also, I won't be killed on the spot, Dan explained. I know I deserve to, but I have much to make up for, and I cannot do that if I'm dead. You will never make up for what you did. Catelyn snarled, unable to help herself. The Septon hung his head. I know, he said quietly, before raising his head to face Lady Catelyn, but I can try. I believe him, Bran said quietly. Hodor carrying over to where the three were talking. Whenever Theon talks like this, he's telling the truth. Luwin nodded. I agree with Lord Bran. I've seen Theon try and lie many times, especially when trying to explain to Lord Stark why he was sneaking a friend out of the castle in the morning. He's not lying now. The Fatin looked at the three. Lady Stark, if you truly care for your children, you will hide them in the crypts. Catelyn looked behind her at the sleeping form of Rickon. Usse and the Reed children were also listening to the conversation, curious to see what Lady Stark would decide. Finally she nodded. Fine, the children, Luwin, and Hodor will hide in the crypts. She said finally, tomorrow morning, you and I shall walk out and meet with this Ramsay Snow. Thatcham nodded. Thank you, my lady. Line break.
Convincing Dagmar and the other Ironborn to hide in the Godswood had been easy.
Theon had told them that he would have Lady Stark and her children march out towards the northern host, while he and the rest of the Ironborn slip through the Hunter Gate and head into the Godswood. Dagmar had been skeptical, but Theon had sworn that he had found old maps with secret trails through the woods that would take them back to their ships on the stony shore. That little lie had been enough to convince the old raider. Flashback. You found maps, Dagmar scowled, crossing his arms. Behind him, the rest of Theon's raiders lounged on the tables in the main hall. They too looked as skeptical as the old warrior. The Septon nodded. I found maps in the Maester's library, he said again. There's a small door just inside the Godswood near the Hunter Gate. You can slip through that in the morning and take the same path back to our ships on the stony shore. And you'll stay here? Dagmar stated. Theon nodded again. I will. I'll hand over the Starks while you all get away. No one's stupid enough to just hand themselves over. One of the raiders jeered from the back of the room. Anson ignored the man and looked at Dagmar. Tell my father I died, he said grimly. I'm sure he won't care. You're his bloody heir, Dagmar grunted. He has Asha, Theon responded. You know that's what my father wants. He's been preparing for her to take over for how many years now? Dagmar shrugged. He and others knew that Balon favored his daughter over his last remaining son. That's why she had been given the honor of sacking a castle, and Theon had been told to essentially bugger off to Bear Island. When do you plan to do this? Dagmar asked finally. Tonight, the Septon replied firmly. Take the food, your booty, and hide in the Godswood. In the morning, I'll take Lady Stark to the Northern Commander and stall while you lot fuck off into the woods. Dagmar scratched his bushy beard before nodding. Fine, he grunted. I think you're fucking stupid. Theon shrugged. You're not the first. Flashback. That evening, Theon forced all Ironborn into the woods, making sure they had enough supplies for when they left. After that, Theon had closed the gate and waited an hour, waiting till the sun was gone and the moon had risen a little before retrieving the Starks. He had taken spears and knives from the armory, handing them to Usse and the Reed children before ushering them all towards the crypts, leaving Lady Stark and Theon alone. The two watched as Maester Luwin was the last to descend into the crypts, giving one last look at the Lady and Prince of Winterfell before following the others. Do you truly think Bolton's bastard will try and harm us? Catelyn asked softly. Theon sighed, shaking his head. I don't know, he admitted, but one of his men put a message arrow through the throat of one of my men. Whoever is out there, they want blood, and they don't seem to particularly care who's. But Robb is their king. Catelyn protested, the two walking back towards the Great Hall. They would never harm his mother or siblings. DeSanton nodded. I agree, but the message didn't mention you. My lady, I was expecting the first line to be release the Starks, and we will allow you to go free, or something similar. The fact that you weren't even mentioned gives me a bad feeling. Catelyn stopped where she was, looking towards the main gate. Why don't we go out now and find out? The Septon raised an eyebrow. Now? Catelyn nodded. The children are in the crypt. The Ironborn are in the Godswood. Why not get this over with here and now? Theon thought for a moment before shrugging. Fuck it, let's get this over with. The two walked towards the main gates, slipping through it before taking a long, slow walk through Wintertown and towards the northern force. Already shouts could be heard as Theon and Catelyn were noticed. There was a lot of activity happening at the center of the camp, where a small group of men were mounting up. At their head was a pale, big-boned young man with long, dark hair and odd eyes. Behind him was an old man that Theon couldn't place, but he wore a cloak with the Karstark sunburst. The Theon and Catelyn stopped at the entrance to Wintertown, waiting as the small group of riders rode towards them. Ramsay Snow, Theon called, gripping Lady Stark's arm. I have Lady Stark. The man known as Ramsay Snow nodded casually. So I see, he commented. The question is whether I care. DeSanton frowned. The man looked far too casual with what was happening. It made Theon feel uneasy. I will let you take her if you guarantee me safe passage to my ships. Ramsay seemed to think for a moment before snapping his fingers. The riders on either side of the bastard dismounted and rushed the two, quickly overpowering them and forcing them to the ground. What are you doing? Catelyn shouted. I am the Lady of Winterfell. Ramsay dismounted and knelt before Catelyn, a harsh smile spreading across his face. It seems you have not heard, my lady, but King Joffrey has named my father as the new Lord Paramount of the North, he said happily. He had also ordered the deaths of all Starks and that Winterfell be burned to the ground. The Theon struggled against the big Northman, holding him down. You can't do that, he snarled. Ramsay raised an eyebrow. Oh, but I can, he said, as if it was the most simple thing in the world. Lady Catelyn here will go to my father, and you, my dear fool, will be my new plaything. He explained with a sadistic glint in his eye. You're fucking mad. Theon roared. Ramsay stepped forward and kicked Theon hard in the jaw, knocking the Ironborn out. Good. I was getting tired of your voice. I hope your screams are far more pleasant, he said before looking at the Karstark man. Burn it to the ground, he ordered, jerking his thumb towards Winterfell. Robb the tent. Your Grace, Brienne called from outside the tent. Robb looked up from what he was reading. It was a report from Jon Fossaway, the man he had left behind at Bitterbridge, with 10,000 reachmen, along with Mace Tyrell, and a small group of lords. The knight was simply detailing the shipments being sent north, and the route they were taking. Yes, Brienne, Robb called back. It's Lady Margaery, Brienne replied. Let her in, Robb said, pushing the reports to the side, and standing up as Margaery entered, dressed in one of her typical dresses, with a lightweight cloak over her shoulders. Her hair was done up in a loose braid that allowed her hair to fall loosely down her shoulders and back. Robb wondered briefly if he would ever be amazed by her beauty.
Margaery,
Robb greeted with a smile. What do I owe the late-night visit? I wanted to talk to you, the young woman answered with a sweet smile. Robb raised an eyebrow. Is everything all right? He asked, pulling out a seat for his betrothed to sit in. Margaery nodded and took the seat, waiting patiently as Robb poured them both glasses of watered-down wine. When Robb sat down, Margaery answered the question. Everything is fine, Margaery said, cradling the glass in her hands. I wanted to ask you about your family. Robb nodded. What do you want to know? Tell me about your siblings. Robb nodded again. There's Sansa and Arya, Bran, Rickon, and Jon, Robb answered slowly. Sansa is like my mother, whom you'll meet at Riverrun. She's a proper lady, who knows how to sew and sing. I'm sure once you meet her, you'll get along perfectly. Margaery raised an eyebrow. Oh, Robb chuckled. Sansa has always believed in the tales of beautiful princesses and great kings, charming knights and the like. You'd be like right out of the pages. Margaery grinned, blushing slightly. Sansa sounds delightful. Robb's smile faded slightly. She's very nice, but she is not without her flaws. She has always been too trusting, naive, and innocent, to her core. She never saw what Joffrey was, and now I think she knows all too well what he is. Margaery's grin faded as well. The South has a habit of making the truth quite painful. Robb nodded. So it would seem. That sat in silence for a moment, neither one of them speaking. Robb was staring down at his glass, and Margaery was patient enough to give him a moment. She knew as well as him the importance of family and how hard it was for him to have his family spread out across the realm. "What of Arya?" Margaery asked finally. "Arya is my aunt, Lyanna." "Come again," Robb answered quietly, looking up at the beautiful girl. "She's as wild and strong as the land we come from. My father called it the wolf blood. My uncle Brandon had it as well." Robb smiled grimly. When Robert Baratheon showed up years ago, Arya appeared with Sarah Roderick's helm on her head. She was better with a bow than Bran, and a much better rider than most thought. My grandmother told me the story of the tourney of Harrenhal. She said that Lyanna Stark was very beautiful. Margaery said, "And perhaps Arya will grow into that too." Robb agreed, "But she's more like Daisy Mormont than yourself. She wants to fight and has fought my mother each time she is forced to be ladylike. She made her septon mad with stress on more than a few occasions. She's the opposite of Sansa." Margaery mused. Robb nodded. "In every way. You said you have 2 brothers? Tell me about them." Margaery asked, wanting Robb to talk more about his family. Unbeknownst to Robb, he got a certain look when talking about his family that Margaery loved watching. There was a sparkle in his eye and he had a certain wistful smile when talking about his siblings. There was nothing but love in the way he spoke about them. "Rickon and Bran," Robb said. "Rickon is the youngest, but he was always following Arya and Bran around, trying to keep up with them. Bran was a happy, active boy. He climbed every wall and tower in Winterfell, and gave my mother quite a fright whenever she caught him." Just like with Sansa, Robb's smile faded. He wanted to be a warrior. He dreamed of being named to the Kingsguard when he was older. Then he had his accident. Margaery frowned. "What accident?" she asked, placing her hand over Robb's. "He fell from the broken tower," Robb said quietly, his face looking like it had aged 10 years. "Bran never fell, never. Not in the snow, not in the rain, not in the wind, and certainly not on a clear day, like when we found him. He was in a coma, and Maester Luwin said that he would never be able to walk again." "That's terrible," Margaery gasped, placing both her hands in Robb's. Robb nodded, glaring at the table. "Then someone tried to kill him," he continued, growling now. "Some cutthroat with a Valyrian knife." Margaery was shocked. "How did he get it?" Robb shook his head. "We still don't know. My mother believed that it was the imp, Tyrion Lannister, but I'm unsure. My mother went south to try and discover more, and she ended up capturing the imp in the Riverlands and taking him to the Vale to stand trial. He called for a trial by combat, and some no-name sellsword fought as his champion. The sellsword won and the imp walked away." "What happened after your mother took the man?" Margaery asked. Robb sighed. "Tepton Lannister and 45,000 soldiers invaded the Riverlands. Almost a year later, here we are. My mother caused a war." Margaery moved one hand up to brush and hold a side of Robb's face. "You can't think like that. I'm sure she was doing what she thought was right." Robb gently grabbed Margaery's hand from his face and held both in front of him, looking her in the eye. "Tyrion Lannister went north with Jon when my brother went to join the Night's Watch. On his way back he left the Maester with designs for a new saddle for Bran, claiming that he had a soft spot for cripples, bastards, and broken things. I don't know, but I could never make myself believe that the man was capable of killing Bran." Margaery nodded. "I'm so sorry, Robb." Robb gave her a slight, sad smile. "It's all right. Bran is alive, and I have to be happy with that." Margaery returned the smile. "Tell me of Jon," she asked, bringing the conversation back on track. Robb chuckled grimly. "Jon should have been named a Stark long ago," he started, taking a long drink of wine before he went on. "He looked more like my father than most of us. He's a fine swordsman, too. Better than me. He's a great man, and my best friend. We were inseparable as children. We took lessons together, played together, trained together. There was nothing we didn't do together." Margaery smiled. "He sounds like you." Robb smiled. "He's my brother. There's nothing we wouldn't do for each other. When I marched south from Winterfell, he was the only person I wanted by my side. Weeks later, there he was, in the dungeons beneath Riverrun. The dungeons? What was he doing there? Margaery asked curiously. Robb sighed and ran a hand through his curls. He and Margaery had been talking for some time, and the lateness was beginning to get to the young man. But he pressed on. My mother has always looked down on my brother because of his birth, Robb answered. When Jon entered the courtyard, my mother had him thrown in the dungeons because she thought he was a deserter of the Night's Watch. Was he? No, Robb said, shaking his head. He had not taken the Black when news of our father's imprisonment reached him. He left that night to be by my side, and sent me a message from Last Hearth telling me so. He traveled across the entire north to be by your side. Margaery marveled softly. The loyalty of family. Starks stick together, Robb answered. If this bloody blasted war has taught me anything, it's that family sticks together. The two fell once again into a compatible silence, enjoying each other's company, the feeling of their hands entwined. There had only been a few instances where the two had been together during the march from Bitterbridge to Riverrun. They had meals together, but Olenna, Darlan, and Loras had been there as well. While on the march, Robb rode at the head of the column, speaking with a new bannerman each day, trying his best to get to know the lords of the Stormlands and the Reach. This was the first moment since their time after the meeting between Stannis and Renly that they had any real time alone. Do you need me to walk me back to your tent? Robb asked quietly, knowing and annoyed that the hour was so late. He wanted to spend every moment with Margaery, but he knew that they both had a long march tomorrow to finish up their journey to Riverrun. Margaery shook her head. Saruman is right outside. Robb nodded. After Renly's death, most of his Kingsguard had pledged their blades to Robb. 3 knights, Saruman, Cole, Sir Geard Morgan, and Sir Parman Crane, had been assigned with Margaery's protection. Robb walked Margaery over to the entrance of the tent, their hands still held together. I will see you in the morning, he promised. Margaery smiled and leaned forward, getting on her tiptoes to lightly kiss Robb on the lips. The small action left Robb feeling like thunderbolts were coursing through him. He instantly smiled. I'll see you in the morning as well, Your Grace, Margaery said before disappearing from the tent, leaving a stunned and wildly grinning Robb. Line break. Riverrun was a welcome sight for the young king. The men of the north and the Riverlands lined the road leading to the castle, giving their king the welcome he deserved. Everywhere he looked, he was greeted with grins and cheers. Robb thought for a moment that he should look like a tough northern king, but soon that thought was lost as he nodded and smiled at his men. Just like his father before him, Robb Stark was well loved by all who fought for him. In the courtyard, Robb's friends waited for him, his arrival having spread through the castle hours before the young wolf rode in. Standing off to the side in 2 groups were his war council and his battle guard, both of which looked extremely happy to see their king healthy, after the stories of his near death. Standing in the center of the courtyard were 3 men, Edmure, the Blackfish, and Jon. Robb rode into the courtyard, his southern guards in council at his back, looking like the king he was. Armored in northern leather and steel, a wolf pelt cloak over his shoulders, claw at his side and his crown of bronze and iron sitting proudly amongst his auburn curls. It was like a scene out of Sansa's dreams. When Robb dismounted, the entire courtyard knelt respectfully, waiting for their king's signal to stand. The king in the north walked up to his uncle, Edmure, who stood in the middle of the small group. Please, uncle, stand, he said kindly. Reaching an arm out to the red-haired man, Edmure took the offer graciously, clasping arms with his nephew as he rose to his feet. It is good to see you again, Your Grace, he said with a smile. Riverrun welcomes you back with open arms. Robb was slightly surprised to hear his uncle speak so formally. When they had last been together, Edmure still called him nephew. Of course, Seprenden was always nearby to correct him. I am happy to be back, if only to go to war once more, Robb replied before turning his attention to the Blackfish. Sir Brynden, I have read glowing reports of your work in the Westerlands. It seems I made the right decision by leaving you in charge. The old knight bowed. I did as tasked, Your Grace. Finally, Robb turned to Jon, who was grinning happily. The two embraced as brothers, slapping each other on the back before Robb stepped back, holding Jon at arm's length. It seems you have been busy as well, he said happily. The story of how you took the Golden Tooth was quite impressive. Jon shook his head slightly. Lucas Blackwood fought alongside me. I cannot take all the glory. Then I shall see him rewarded as well, Robb promised. He looked around, the smile fading from his face. Where is my mother? Is she with Lord Hoster? Jon's smile disappeared as well. Robb, he said quietly, so that only his brother could hear him. Lord Hoster died weeks ago. Edmure is the new Lord of Riverrun, he explained. Your mother returned to Winterfell after his funeral. Robb grimaced. He had looked forward to introducing Margaery to his mother, but that would have to wait. Your Grace, Edmure said, cutting off Robb's thoughts. May I introduce to you the new Lady of Riverrun and my wife, Lady Rosalind. Robb and Rosalind exchanged awkward smiles as Rosalind dropped into a perfect curtsy. It is a pleasure to see you again, Your Grace, she said quietly. Robb bowed slightly in return. You as well, my lady. I am happy to see that my uncle has found a good woman to marry, he said, praising the two before looking behind him at the green carriage that rolled into the courtyard. Uncle Sarah Brendan. Jon, there is someone I would like you to meet, he said, the smile reappearing on his face as he stepped towards the carriage, helping Margaery out. With her on his arm, Robb brought Margaery over to his family. All four bowed to her. Margaery, may I introduce Lord Edmure, the new Lord of Riverrun, and his new wife, Lady Rosalind. Sir Brendan, my great-uncle, and my brother Jon, he said, gesturing to each person as he said their name. Margaery is my betrothed. Margaery curtsied to them. It is a pleasure to meet you all, she said happily, her smile melting away any awkward tension that might have been in the air between Robb and Rosalind. His Grace has spoken nothing but your praises during his time in the south, and on our march here. The Rose of Highgarden, Edmure said. Tales of your beauty do not do you justice, my lady. That is very kind of you, my lord, Margaery responded easily. I have read much on Riverrun. I would love to see more of the castle if possible. It would be my honor to show you tomorrow, my lady, Rosalind offered. The sharp clack of a cane heralded the arrival of Lady Olenna, who was followed by a smiling Garlan and a dour Loras. Both were armed and armored for war, following Robb's example early when it came to wearing their armor while on the march. Both were an impressive sight. The mighty Blackfish. It has been a long while, said Brendan. Lady Olenna commented, setting her cane before her. And Lord Edmure, I am sorry to hear of your father's passing. He was a truly great man. Both Edmure and Sarah Brendan bowed. That is kind of you, lady, Edmure said, not sure who the old woman was in front of him. Olenna, Brendan answered, gazing with respect at the matriarch of the Tyrell family. The Queen of Thorns. I have not seen you since Harrenhal, if my memory serves me right. The years have been kind to you, Lady Olenna said before looking at her own wrinkled hand. I wish I could say the same for the rest of us. Sarah Brendan smiled slightly. Age is but a number, my lady. Your mind has remained unaddled, and your tongue as sharp as Valyrian steel. Sir Brendan, it is an honor to finally meet you, Garland said respectfully. I would love to hear your stories of the War of the Ninepenny Kings if there is time. As a second son myself, I have always looked up to you. Brendan nodded to both Tyrells. Sarah Zagarlan and Cedar Loras, I take it, he said. Fine warriors both, I have heard. I hear you are particularly talented with the lance, Cedar Loras. The young Tyrell knight sniffed disdainfully. I am, he said simply, not an ounce of kindness or respect in his voice. The air was once again filled with tension, as the Knight of Flowers' words nearly shattered the goodwill that was coming from both parties. Margaery was again the one to break it. Jon, I hear you are now called the White Wolf, she said, glancing over at the giant albino before looking back at the man. An apt name, she joked kindly. Jon smiled slightly. Thank you, my lady. I strive to make myself worthy of the title. I have a grand idea, Robb said happily. Why not a dinner, tonight, after I have had time to meet with my council and discuss future plans? Eardmer bowed. I will see it set up, your grace, he said immediately. I will see that the best food from the Riverlands is provided. I will call the council together in an hour. Scepter Brendan added, as well. That will give his grace and his retinue time to unpack before we are once more sucked into war. Robb nodded. Thank you, he said. An hour it is. Line break. Robb's council had been shifted with the new additions of the Stormlanders and Reachmen. Now the Northmen and Riverlanders covered the right-hand side of the table, while the new arrivals sat themselves on Robb's left, Lord Tarly and Ser Brendan, each taking the seats on either side of the young wolf. Jon and Eddard Stark were also in attendance, leaning against the wall. First and foremost, I must thank the lords of the North and the Riverlands for their work in the Westerlands. With the added might of our southern allies, I mean to bring Casterly Rock and the rest of the Westerlands and the Iron Islands eventually under my banner. Robb said firmly. Has there been any word on Lord Tywin? Reports are that the lords of the Blackwater have declared for Joffrey, Blackfish said grimly. They have joined the Crownlander host at Duskendale and may move north to reinforce the Old Lion at Harrenhal.
How many do they number?
Tarly asked. Some 15,000 Crownlanders, Bracken answered. Is there anything else that needs to be said? Robb asked, addressing the entire table. He wanted to get all the information out in the open before making his plans known. I have received word from my steward that the Stony Dornish have been seen rallying men, Lord Caron commented. They may be just reinforcing their borders, but they may also be taking advantage of the Stormlord's absence from the region. The same is said from my father in Old Town. Sarah Baylor added. Robb tapped the table thoughtfully. They can't possibly be siding with the Lannisters, he said quietly. Ser Brendan shook his head. Prince Doran and all of Doran will forever hold a grudge against Tywin Lannister and his family for what happened to Ilya Martell. She was beloved in Doran. Perhaps it is a power play by the Dornish. Garland offered. Tommen and Morsella are unbetrothed. Perhaps Tywin has arranged something. Even with news of Joffrey's parentage. Lord Blackwood said curiously.
Garland shrugged.
Joffrey still holds the Iron Throne, he explained. Whether we like it or not, that still means something to many people. It's a symbol, or the symbol rather, of his kingship. What kind of host can the Dornish gather? Robb asked, looking at Tarly. 30,000 if not more, the old soldier responded grimly. They did not fight in the Greyjoy Rebellion and have had over 2 decades to replenish their losses after Rhaegar's death on the Trident. If what my great-uncle says is true, then we have nothing to fear. Robb answered firmly. I shall take the northern host and the might of the Stormlands with me and march south against Tywin. Lord Tarly shall take the Reacher host and finish off Ser Brendan's western campaign. Once that is done, you shall also move on and take the Iron Islands. Robb ordered. The Lord of Hornhill, nodding seriously, a glint in his eye as he received the role he always wanted. Control of the Reach army to lead as he chooses, and no Mace Tyrell to hold him back. What about the north? Lord Glover asked curiously. Robb turned to Ser Brendan. Has there been any news from the north? The old knight shook his head. I sent Lord Roose with the Freys and other northern houses to reinforce Ser Roderick's efforts. A few weeks ago, I have heard nothing since, he answered. He said that he was going to raise more forces once he reached the north. Robb nodded. I will send a raven to Winterfell after this meeting and ask my mother for news. If we need to send men, then we shall. At this point, Robb was about to end the meeting when he was interrupted by the arrival of the Maester, who hurried in carrying 2 scrolls. The first he handed to Lord Hawker, who looked surprised to have received it. The second he handed it to Robb, which was a lot bigger than the message that Lord Hawker had received. A rider from the twins, your grace, the Maester said quietly before scurrying off again. Robb shared a confused glance with his council before breaking the gray seal and unrolling the scroll, reading the first words before his bones turned to ice. He immediately looked towards Jon, who recognized the look and strode towards his brother, peering over his shoulder and reading the message himself. Robb leaned back in his chair, unable to comprehend what he had just learned, while Jon looked at the council, his face a mixture of fury and sadness. The only man who didn't look confused was Roland Hawker, who looked just as outraged as the bastard of Winterfell. My lords, Jon said grimly, we have been betrayed. The Boltons, Dustons, Ricewells, and Freys have all turned their cloaks in favor of the Lannisters. Roose Bolton's bastard has burned Winterfell to the ground, capturing Lady Stark in the process. Your Grace, what does this mean? Eddard Stark asked seriously, stepping forward. It means we have a new enemy to the north, Jon replied grimly. Jon 14. It took a few moments before the room descended into absolute chaos. The northern lords were on their feet, banging the table and demanding leave to head north and kill Roose, while the lords of the Riverlands were asking for the same leave, but to kill the Freys. The lords of the Stormlands and Reach, with the exception of Lord Tarly, tried to defuse the situation, but that only pulled them into arguments with their new allies. Jon watched grimly as the once united table broke and shattered into dozens of different arguments. Personal insults were being flung across the table, and hands were going to knives and swords. "My lords," Jon snapped, slamming his dagger down on the table, "be quiet and retake your seats." Jon's voice cracked like a whip, breaking through the red haze that overtaken many and finding some sense of reason in them. With glares and a few mumbled words, they sat back down, some even having the grace to look ashamed with the way they had acted. "We have been betrayed, but that is no reason for us to start fighting amongst ourselves," Jon continued, waiting for Robb to step in and take over again. "Let us not forget that we have a host of over 100,000 strong. We will deal with Bolton and his bastard, as well as the Greyjoys and the Lannisters, but we cannot do that if we are acting like children." Seprendon nodded firmly. "Jon is right. We have the forces here to attack our enemies on all fronts. What does His Grace think?" Lord Tarly asked, looking at Robb, who was still leaning back in his seat, staring at the message in his hands. No one said anything, just looking at their king, who seemed to have lost himself in the message. Thankfully, Jon seemed to fix the problem. He ripped the scroll from Robb's hands, tore it in half, and threw it into the nearest brazier. That jolted Robb into action. He sat up, clearing his throat. "My brother and great-uncle are correct. Now all that is left is to determine who goes where," he started, his voice surprisingly strong, even if the one who spoke looked close to tears. "Lord Tarly, I will need to borrow some 20,000 men, but you will still march on the Westerlands and Iron Islands." The Lord of Hornhill nodded. "Of course, your grace. I shall send word to Lord Wella should I need more. Garlan, you will command the Reachmen who march with me." Robb continued, "Sirton Brendan, you will take the men of the Riverlands and take the crossing. Once you have it, return to me." The old knight smiled grimly. "It would be my pleasure, your grace. My northern lords will go north, help take the twins, and move on to Moat Cailin. My brother Jon will lead the northern host." Robb said finally, a fierce growl coming from that side of the table as he made the announcement. "I will take the lords of the Stormlands, along with the 20,000 Reachmen under Garlan and another 1,000 Northmen under Lord Forrester." "And where will you be going, your grace?" Lord Glover asked curiously. "I will go after the Lion of Casterly Rock," Robb answered grimly. "He must be dealt with, and I mean to see him sent off with his tail between his legs." "Your grace," Jon said quietly, "perhaps it would be best if a more experienced commander led the Northmen." Robb shook his head. "You are my brother," he said firmly. "Father taught us both how to lead. You will bring Bolton and his bastard to justice, save my mother, and free our home of traitors and raiders." The two brothers had a silent fight with their eyes. Jon still felt unsure that he was ready to command a large host of men, but Robb would not be moved on the subject. Robb's message was clear. If he could not be in the north to free his mother and make sure she was safe, then Jon had to be there for him. This was a family matter. He could not entrust it to a bannerman. Finally, Jon sighed and nodded. "I will do as you command, your grace." Robb turned back to his council. "Prepare your men and move out as soon as possible." "That is all?" That council nodded and left, nodding respectfully to their king as they did. Soon, only Jon and Garlan were left with Robb, who was slumped in his chair, staring at the table, his mind a million miles away. The two warriors talked quietly a little ways from him. "Do you think it's wise to have the dinner?" Jon asked. "He just learned that his mother is a prisoner, just like our sisters." Garlan looked over at the king before looking back at Jon. "I think it is," he replied. "Margaery might be able to bring him out of his black mood. She's always been good at that." Jon nodded. "I've never seen him like this," he admitted, glancing at his brother. "With all that's gone on, I don't know how he handles it. Our father, sisters, and now brothers and Lady Catelyn, not to mention the weight of the crown. Margaery and my grandmother might be able to ease his mind if only a little," Garlan offered. "I will work with Lord Edmure and set up a small dinner. Myself, Loras, my grandmother, Margaery, yourself, and Robb." Jon smiled slightly. "That would be best. Thank you, Sir Garlan." The Tyrell Knight shook his head. "We will be brothers soon, There is no need for a sect. Catelyn, please, when we are alone. Jon nodded, then stopped. Robb and Margaery are to be married, are they not? He asked. Garland frowned. They are. We'll have to do it soon, within the next few days. Tomorrow, Robb said, walking up to the two. We'll do it tomorrow. Can it even be set up by tomorrow? Jon asked curiously. Garland grinned. Leave that to my grandmother. She will see that it's done. Robb nodded. Good, he said quietly. Let me know when dinner is set. And with that he left. Line break. Dinner was a subdued event, thanks in no small part to Lady Catelyn's imprisonment and the Boltons' betrayal. Robb picked at his food, eating very little of the roasted venison and glazed vegetables. Margaery sat on his right, doing her best to make small talk with him, trying to bring Robb out of his mood, but it had little effect. Talk around the table was kept to a minimum. Lady Olenna and Jon both kept glancing at Robb as they ate, not sure what to say. Garland simply ate, looking the most at ease with the situation, showing that his faith in his sister's ability was absolute. Loras kept his glare on his plate, the only one who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but in the room with Robb. Jon, Lady Olenna said finally, I hear you trekked across the north to be by his grace's side. Is that true? Jon nodded, thankful for the distraction. It is, my lady, he said, continuing the conversation. I had my mind set on the Night's Watch for the past few years. Unfortunately, it was not what I imagined, and I hesitated when asked to take the Black. When I heard of my father's imprisonment, I came south to be by my brother's side. Will you rejoin the Watch after the war? Garland asked curiously. Jon thought for a moment before shaking his head. Most likely not, he answered honestly. Hopefully I'll find a place in the north, or I will become a sworn sword to my brother. A Kingsguard? Margaery asked. Jon shrugged. If he asks, then I will accept, he answered simply. A rude scoff came from beside Garland, where Loras was still staring at his food. The Knight of Flowers looked unusually scruffy. His hair looked greasy and unwashed, and there were the beginnings of stubble on his sharp jaw. There were also dark bags under his eyes, as if he hadn't been getting enough sleep. Many people tried to steer clear of the knight the last few weeks, as he was prone to lash out. You're not Kingsguard material, Loras sneered, glaring at Jon. Jon shrugged. That's not for me to determine, he responded calmly. If my brother wishes for me to protect him, then I have no reason to say no. Loras snorted. Who have you fought? He challenged angrily. Some half-trained Lannisters, at Oxcross. You surprised them before they could put up a proper fight. At the Golden Tooth, you used trickery to enter the castle, and once again attacked without the enemy expecting it. You fought nobody. Loras, Garland said, trying to deter his younger brother from the path he was taking, but Loras would have none of it. Quiet, Garland, he snapped angrily. I am twice the warrior, any of you are, twice the man, he cried, slamming both hands on the table as he stood. You all swore loyalty to Renly, and before his body was cold, you were ready to swear loyalty to this frozen savage. That is enough, Loras, Olenna said, her voice snapping with command. Her tone alone would have been enough to rein in the hot-headed knight, but Loras disregarded her, his face red and his breathing coming fast and heavy. I am not finished, Loras shouted. You may think me stupid, but I am no fool. You've been planning on marrying Margaery to the Northmen even while she was Renly's wife. He snarled. You're all traitors. Margaery shook her head. I was faithful to Renly, she said evenly. Never once did we ever talk about me leaving him for Robb, nor did Robb ever bring it up. It was never a thought, brother. Olenna nodded. Your sister's betrothal to the Northern King was a good opportunity born from a tragic accident, she explained. You can't seriously expect us to be loyal to a dead man. Loras's face was red with fury as his gaze went from his grandmother to his sister, to Robb to Garland, before starting over. He was like a bull trying to decide who he would go after first. Jon quietly grabbed hold of the sharp meat knife next to his plate, hiding it under his arm, preparing to intercede if the Tyrell man got violent. You loved him, Robb said simply, speaking for the first time. He was your best friend, your mentor. You shared an unbreakable bond. When he declared himself king, you were right there at his side, as you have always been. Loras nodded slightly, still standing. He would have been a great king? Robb smiled sadly. With that, we agree. Renly might have had some flaws, but he was, at his core, a good man who thought he could be a better king than Joffrey and his brother. Do you think I will be a good king? Loras opened his mouth to reply, then shut it, unsure of what to reply with. The anger he had started with was quickly leaving him, unable to continue in the face of Robb's soft and understanding tone. I don't know, Loras said finally, slowly sitting back down. Robb sighed. Loras, I am not Renly, and I know that there are probably others in this army who wish that I was, he explained easily. I can't bring back the dead, or else both my father and Renly would be here now. Neither deserve to be killed in the fashion that they were. I know that I have no right to ask anything of you, but I feel I must. Will you fight for me, not to help me bring down those who have done my family harm, but to help me create a realm that Renly would be proud of? Fight in Renly's honor? Loras asked quietly. Robb nodded. Exactly. Fight by my side. Help me create a world that Renly would be proud to be a part of. Do not forget him. I'm sure you never will. But take what made him a good man, his dreams and desires for a great Westeros, and help me make that a reality. The table was quiet, all eyes on the young wolf and the Knight of Flowers. Garland, Olenna, and Margaery had never seen Loras quieted in such a way, and Jon had never seen Robb speak with the maturity that he was displaying now. He sounded like a man twice his age. He sounded like their father. Loras hung his head while Robb waited patiently for an answer. Finally, the young knight raised his head and looked the Northern King in the eye, nodding firmly. I can do that, he said quietly, his eyes filled with purpose as he held himself a little straighter. Robb smiled. Good. I will certainly need a good sword by my side when I go after Tywin. He joked lightly. Loras managed a half-hearted smile, the only one that his family had seen since before Renly's murder. It was certainly a miraculous sight, given that it was Robb who had gotten it out of the man. I think I can help with that, he said. Jon was enjoying the moment when he realized that Catelyn had his eyes on him, an eyebrow raised. It was then that he realized that he had forgotten to bring up something very important. Lady Olenna, with the army soon breaking up, I was wondering how soon it would be possible to arrange my brother's and Lady Margaery's marriage. Jon asked curiously. The older woman popped a slice of cheese in her mouth, chewing thoughtfully. I believe it can be done. It will be a small affair, mind you, but I will make sure it is done. She glanced at Robb, though after spending some time around his grace, I'm sure a small ceremony might be best, regardless. Robb grinned and nodded to her. It seems you've mastered Northern culture, my lady. How much time do you need? Catelyn asked. The Queen of Thorns smiled. Give me one night, my dear boy. I will make sure all is ready. Robb looked over at Margaery, who was watching the discussion with a beautiful smile on her face. Are you sure you still want to do this? He asked curiously. Margaery laughed. I think I'll take the risk, she joked. Robb laughed as well, a real laugh, one that he hadn't had since before the whole bloody war had begun. Not since his entire family was in one place at Winterfell when Heir had flung food at Sansa at the feast, welcoming the king to the north. It was a great sight for Jon to see. His brother finally properly happy. Line break. Quite impressive, was it not? Lady Olenna mused after Robb, Margaery, Garland, and Loras had left, leaving the old woman and Jon alone. Jon nodded, tossing his napkin over the remnants of his food. Robb has grown up, and each time I see a sign of it, I'm always surprised, he answered. He reminds me of our father in so many ways. I remember meeting Lord Rickard, Lord Stark's late father, Olenna said. The man was one of the smartest I had ever encountered. He was calm, collected, thoughtful, deceptively cunning, and as dangerous as the massive sword he carried on his back. I heard your father was like that. Jon nodded slightly. My father had always been the quietest of his siblings, according to my uncle Benjen. Brandon was brash and rugged. Lyanna was wild and beautiful, and my father was quiet and thoughtful. Benjen is a mix of all. He's funny, but also keenly observant. A fine pack of wolves and 2 dragons reduced them to 2, Olenna commented. Royce spent some time in the Reach learning under Garland. I asked him about his father. Bronze young, Jon said. He passed through Winterfell when he was taking one of his sons to the wall. My father always spoke highly of him. Olenna nodded. Indeed. Lord Royce was very good friends with the young Eddard Stark, met the others at the tourney of Harrenhal. I asked the young knight what his father thought of the Warden of the North, and do you know what his reply was? Jon shook his head. Something about my father's honor, I would assume. Olenna smirked. Clever, she laughed. No, Lord Royce believes that Eddard Stark was more dangerous than even Tywin Lannister. Jon raised an eyebrow. Tywin Lannister was infamous throughout Westeros, from the Wall to Dorne. He fought in the War of Nine Penny Kings, was hand to the Mad King, sacked King's Landing during Robert's Rebellion. His name was probably feared across the narrow sea. I wonder why Lord Royce thinks that, Jon wondered. A logical question, and one that I asked immediately. Olenna said. According to Lord Royce, what made Eddard Stark so dangerous was that, while Tywin Lannister is feared, Ned Stark was beloved by all who knew him. Those who fought for him fought out of the love they had for House Stark and the man leading them. There are few things stronger than hate or the desire for revenge. But love tends to win more often than not. Olenna nodded towards where Robb had been sitting. It seems the apple did not fall far from the tree. Or the red leaf from the weirwood, Jon joked. Robb has always been charming, and was as fine an heir as any man would want. But these last few weeks, he's become more than what he was. He's become a king. Olenna agreed. And if he wins this war, Westeros will have the best ruler it's had in over 40 years. He'll have a good wife at his side, Jon said with a smile. Olenna shook her head. He comes from a great family. Think about it, my young and handsome Northman. Every great family in Westeros has not held power like the Starks have. The Arryns came with the Andals, the Casterlys ruled before the Lannisters, same with the Mudds and Tullys, Durandons and Baratheons, and the Gardeners and Tyrells. Even the Martells were a lowly house before Nymeria and the Rhonish sailed in. House Stark has ruled the North for centuries. They are leaders, conquerors, victors. They are the strongest house in all of Westeros, and I have a feeling Tyrion Lannister will soon realize that.